Hey guys, this is Frank Yecker, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Hey, this is Rich Franklin.
What's up, everybody? This is Chris Lieben.
This is Diego Sanchez, Randy Couture,
Alistair Overeem.
Hi, this is Stephen Bonner.
This is Don Fry.
Hey, I'm Phil, Mr. Wonderful Davis.
TJ Dillashaw.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Welcome to Submission Radio. It's the 22nd of November, and we are back. Dennis Gradov and Kasper Ozlowski here with a return show of Submission Radio, saying welcome to all the Submission Radio fans of old, and welcome to all the new fans that we've picked up through our coverage of UFC 193. If this is the first episode you guys are listening to, welcome to Submission Radio. We're happy to have you here.
Oh yeah, it is so good to be back, and it is so good to have a whole bunch of new listeners and new ears to speak into. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. A bit of a breakdown on the show for those who are not familiar with it. We've got 3 guests this week. Normally, the guests will be done and interviewed in real time, followed by a bit of a breakdown of the events that have been happening over the weekend. This time, it's been a crazy week down here at Submission Radio, so a few of them are pre-recorded. We've got Ken Shamrock in the middle of the show. He's going to be done in real time. However, Michael Schiavello, our first guest, the voice, commentator extraordinaire, and obviously does some hilarious interviews. He's going to be joining us, but it's a pre-recorded interview. We spoke to old Schiavello a couple of days ago. Mark Hunt. We also have Mark Hunt on the show. This one, again, was pre-recorded on the same day as Michael Schiavello. Just a few notes. A few technical difficulties when speaking to Mark Hunt. Just a few tough things about that interview. Unfortunately, the audio is not the greatest. I just want to apologize. Before that, we're still going to play the interview. We're going to leave that one last. So it's going to be Michael Schiavello, Ken Shamrock joining us on the show, and then we're going to play you Mark Hunt, so bear with us. We apologize for the audio, and we promise that in the future when we get Mark Hunt, it will be done through Skype. But what else do we have on the show, Dennis?
Well, you and me, Cass, obviously these people might have seen us through the UFC 193 coverage. We'll be talking about our experience, what it was like backstage, our thoughts as we went through the experience of all the different personalities, from Ronda Rousey to Holly Holm to Mark Hunt and everybody else in between, Joanna. So listen to that. And also, a card that sort of has been overlooked by a lot of fans, UFC Fight Night Magny versus Gastelum. We'll be getting into it. A few really fun fights to talk about, a few things coming out of this event. So we'll be breaking that down first, and then afterwards talking about UFC 193. We'll also be talking about our thoughts on Ronda Rousey, what people are saying about her, what we think she needs to do, and what we thought about her performance against Holly Holm. So a lot of stuff to talk about this week.
Yeah, it's a big show. We've been away for a weekend, so it's going to be a fairly extended episode of Submission Radio. Just a bit of housekeeping. If you haven't already, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at SubmissionAUS. Jump on our Facebook, facebook.com/SubmissionRadioAUS. Dennis, a few neat things about the Facebook and the Twitter that you always like to tell people and how they're different?
They're different. Not that many people have different pages, but Twitter, we got a lot of jokes, a lot of GIFs. We love our GIFs here at Submission Radio. You guys will see them if you follow us on Twitter. Also, we like to put up a lot of fun little things up there and let you guys know when different videos are up. With the Facebook page, obviously, we do let you know when certain videos are up, but it's more about getting your opinion on events. We put up all the hot topics once a day or once every couple of days, and we want to hear from you. Also, a great way to get in touch with us. If you want to message us, say hello, tell us what you think of the show or anything like that, always feel free to do that, and that's through the Facebook page. But guys, without further ado, Cass, you mentioned we've got a great lineup, and it's time to jump into it. It's a pre-record, but it's a great one nevertheless. Michael Schiavello here on Submission Radio.
All right, guys, our next guest has one of the most iconic voices in mixed martial arts, as well as commentating. He's also done a stack of hilarious and entertaining interviews. He is the voice, none other than Michael Schiavello. Welcome to Submission Radio, Michael. How are you?
Kasper, Dennis, good to finally be on here with you guys, mate, and you're doing a fantastic job repping us Aussies well across the globe, and it's nice to be on with you guys.
Well, there you go. Speaking of quotes that we're going to rip off the interview and replay over and over in the future. Thank you very much, Michael. Now, before we get into the thick of it, we just want to paint a bit of a mental picture for everybody. As a fellow Melburnian, where did you watch the fights? Were you at home? Did you make it out to the event? Were you at a packed bar? Set the scene for us.
You know what? It was pretty boring, actually, for me. There's no great story to tell. I'd been on the road last week, as I am every Friday night, and then I travel home on a Saturday. And due to some of the bad weather as we come into a very cold autumn here in America, took me a little bit longer to get back to my base, which is Las Vegas these days. So I didn't manage to watch the fights live. I managed to monitor Twitter from home while I was putting my young son to bed, and then I managed to catch a replay of the fights the next day. There's actually no great story. I should have actually made one up and been prepared to blow you guys away. But I was putting my kid to bed and monitoring Twitter to see the results. Particularly interested in, obviously, in Mark Hunt and, Ronda and Holly as well. And then I finally managed to watch the fight the next day. So no stunning story to go with this one.
Wow. So you knew about, obviously, the main event result before you actually watched it?
I did. I knew about the main event result off Twitter, and I was following it along like a giddy schoolboy, watching a few of the play-by-play people on Twitter that I actually respect, that can, do a half-decent job at reporting stuff as it happens.
Yeah.
And when I saw that tweet come through, the OMG, Holly knocks out Ronda, I was like, what? Oh, wow, that's great. That's fantastic, because a few of us had actually predicted that might happen, and when it came to fruition, I remember I looked across at my wife and I said, hey, told you that Holly would beat Ronda, and there was a big smile on my face.
When you say you looked over at your wife, did you say it calmly, or did you let out a "Good night, Irene"?
Well, my wife's name is Irene, ironically enough.
Wow.
And, good night, Irene. You guys know me from the old days. I've been screaming that since I first began commentating, even before I began on Fox Sports in Australia, before I was commentating fight events. And, so way before I met my wife. So, But ironically, I marry a girl named Irene, and they always say that the universe brings you whatever you ask for, you manifest whatever you ask for. Well, I've been screaming Irene since I was 16 years old when I first started commentating. But strangely enough, I've never actually said "Good night, Irene" to my wife named Irene. It just seems weird for me to say that. So I've actually never ever said it to my wife.
It's good that you picked an attractive name to yell at from a young age. Now, Let's talk about Holly Holm. I mean, you called a lot of her fights in Legacy FC. What do you think about her journey to become the champion? And have you been following her career for a while? Were you surprised with the result? You just mentioned to us, I believe you picked this.
Well, I see some people saying it's the biggest upset of all time in mixed martial arts. I've got to disagree. Was it a surprise? Yes. Was it a shock? Perhaps, yes. Was it a big upset? I don't think so. You can't call somebody who is a 9-time world boxing champion and a former kickboxer and who was, 6-0 in mixed martial arts, you can't call her beating Ronda, who was, what was Ronda's record? 10-0, 12-0, whatever it was. You can't call that an upset. Because Holly Holm knows what it's like to be in big world championships. She was undefeated in mixed martial arts. She had such a great decorated boxing career. She's with such a superb camp. So to call this the biggest upset in MMA history, I don't think it comes anywhere near to the upset of Matt Serra versus GSP for maybe one of the biggest upsets of all time. Was it a shock? Maybe in the sense that, all the momentum and all the hype that was surrounding Ronda, and if you caught on the hype and you're part of that hype bandwagon, you believe that the aura surrounding Ronda was that she was some invincible, almost mythical creature that just could not be touched by anybody, and she'd come in here and she'd armbar, a Holly Holm who couldn't defend a takedown, who couldn't do anything rather than box and head kick, and would get taken down and subbed out in under 90 seconds, which seemed to be the general consensus. And the fact that Holly beat her so resoundingly, the fact that she clowned her on a lot of it, and made Ronda look very subpar, very average. And again, you follow the hype about Ronda over the last 18 months especially, and here's a woman who was coming out saying she could fight guys, and coming out saying she could beat Floyd Mayweather, and coming out, on the cover of Ring magazine and saying she wanted to go into boxing and give her 2 or 3 months, and she thinks she could become a boxing champion. And then she's fighting Holly Holm, a 9-time world champion, in a main event in Melbourne in front of a world record crowd, and she's throwing punches and slipping under the momentum of her own punches. I mean, to me, it was not the biggest upset of all time in mixed martial arts. It may have come as a shock or a surprise just because so much momentum and so much publicity was favouring Ronda in the lead up to it, that for a lot of people that aren't dialed into the sport didn't know who Holly Holm was. They just thought she was going to be another piece of fodder to be fed to this, ravenous lioness that was Ronda Rousey, but who completely showed up Ronda.
That's very, very well said, Michael. But let me ask you this. Much has been made of Ronda's game plan. Do you think she came in with the wrong game plan? Or do you think it was more of a case where, that's all she's really always known?
Well, it depends how you analyse it. If the game plan was to come in and charge after Holly Holm and try and bully her and try and outstrike her, stupid game plan. Ridiculous. It was never going to work. It may work against subpar strikers like a Kat Zingano or a Sarah McMahon. You can't compare these women at all. You can't compare their pedigree with the pedigree of someone like Holly Holm, especially their striking, which, is just non-existent compared to Holly Holm's. So to come in and employ that game plan, it just would never work. If you've seen Holly fight before, if you've seen her in her boxing, if you've seen her in her previous MMA fights, if you've seen her in kickboxing, you know that she's a fighter who knows how to use footwork and head movement. She knows the quarter turns, the pirouettes, how to cut angles. So to come in and try and be forceful and fight someone like that as a bully and try and engage her in the pocket and throw hands with her was in my opinion, a poor game plan. Now, mind you, someone like Ronda, who relies so much on her judo takedowns to then transition to the ground and go for the arm bars, relies on getting on the inside, getting inside of jabs, inside of kicks to put hands on you, because a judo person, a judoka, is only effective when they can put hands on you. And by that I mean when they're grappling with you and they can clinch up with you. When it went to canvas, Holly managed to find herself back up onto her feet. She got out of an armbar, she got back to her feet, and it was one of several, crap moments where I think she realized that she was being outsmarted and completely outclassed by a very high caliber opponent, an opponent of a higher caliber than any of the ladies she had fought before.
I mean, there's a bit of a discussion going on, Michael, just about the fact that she did the game plan that was given to her to the best of her ability. How much of this loss do you think falls on Edmund and her training camp due to the fact that the strategy didn't really make much sense, and also the advice that he gave in between rounds? How much of the blame do you think he should take for that performance?
I think the blame has to be divvied up. I think you either divide blame between people. I don't think Ronda came in her best shape. I think mentally she undid herself. Take it back to the weigh-ins, and we all saw that very famous footage now at the weigh-ins where they're staring down, they're toe-to-toe, and Ronda pushes down Holly's arm and starts pushing on her, and then Joe Rogan does an interview with Ronda, and Ronda's stuttering. She's spluttering. She's irate during this interview. Now, even though I thought that Holly would knock out Ronda, that to me pretty much cemented the deal when I saw her interview with Joe as she was spluttering and stuttering. And, we know that Ronda can do some very volatile interviews, that she's got that whole, demeanor about her where she does the bitchiness about her and the attitude, the sort of rebel attitude, that sort of thing. But this was a different psychology altogether. It looked as if Holly had gotten in her mind and had already, started to sink in and dismantle the mental strength that Ronda usually has. And to me, that was the first sign of the downfall right there. And the fight was really the icing on the cake. And a lot of people are defeated by Ronda Rousey before they get in the cage for her, because Ronda is so good at mentally breaking you and breaking your spirit even before you throw punches or even before you stand off from her inside the octagon. But now the shoe was on the other foot, because I believe that Holly did that to Ronda by maintaining her calmness and not getting the reaction out of Ronda that Ronda was perhaps expecting. It undid Ronda. And, Holly just looked so unfazed throughout the whole process leading up to the fight that I think that undid Ronda. And there was so much overwhelming pressure on Ronda, who's had all this media publicity about her and all the movie roles she's taken and the TV roles and the magazine shoots and all the rest of it, just built to a boiling point where I believe a part of her snapped. Now, do you blame that on the UFC? Do you blame that on the media? Who do you blame it on? At the end of the day, everything we do in life is a choice. Ronda had the choice to do movies, to do magazine covers, to do TV shows, radio shows, talk shows, etc., and sacrifice training time and maybe developing a better game plan and maybe getting herself in better shape. She sacrificed that stuff. That was the expense of taking on the extra burden of the media. You can only blame yourself for that, Yes, a game plan, you have to divvy up some of the blame to a coach, to not having a proper game plan formulated that you could implement. But at the end of the day, the blame has to come down on you, because no matter who your coach is and what your coach is telling you, only you are able to implement anything in the cage. The coach can't implement it for you. I've seen a lot of great fighters come out with fantastic game plans and not stick to them. We've heard coaches barking from the corner. How many times have you watched the UFC or boxing or any fight for that matter, K1, kickboxing, Muay Thai, and heard a coach barking instructions from the corner and looking like they're going to burst a blood vessel in their head because their fighter doesn't listen to them? The coach may have the right idea and may have the right advice, but it doesn't necessarily always mean that the fighter is going to stick to that or is going to do that. They're going to do what they feel is right for themselves at that moment. And unfortunately for Ronda, what she chose to do was not right at that moment.
Well, what do you think about an immediate rematch, Michael? Do you think it makes sense, and do you think it would go any different if Holly fought Ronda again?
It's an interesting question. I was just talking to Pat Miocic about this about half an hour ago. We're having this discussion. I think a rematch will be huge. Already they're touting the pay-per-view figures for this one. I just saw a report online that they're looking at 1.2 to 1.3 million pay-per-view buys, which is monstrous. And a rematch between the two could even do bigger pay-per-view buys than that. To do an immediate rematch, personally, I'd like to see the division be opened up a little more and give some of these other ladies an opportunity to showcase their skills and pit themselves against Holly Holm and, test Holly's mettle as a champion a little more before the rematch with Ronda. You got the mouth-watering prospect of seeing Christian Cyborg come to UFC now that she's been signed. I mean, who wouldn't like to see Cyborg versus Holly Holm? Who wouldn't like to see Gina Carano maybe come back into UFC and have a fight against Holly Holm? Who wouldn't like to see Miocic Tate? Miocic was quick to open her mouth and belittle Ronda Rousey after Ronda's KO. Well, you know what? Let Miocic go through Holly now if she wants another crack at Ronda. Holly's the woman's got the championship. Let's see some of these other, very mouth-watering potential matchups before we see a rematch between Holly and Ronda. But from a marketing point of view, I can also understand that, hey, you know what? If Holly loses to a Miocic Tate or, Holly loses to one of these other women in the division, there goes that massive rematch, because Miocic versus Ronda number 3 has nowhere near the appeal of Ronda versus Holly number 2. So we don't know how the powers that be, the mechanics, the cog behind this whole wheel is thinking at the moment. But my thoughts would be I'd like to see the division opened up a bit more. And I think one of the blessings is that Holly now being the champion shows that it's not just a one-woman division. There's an opportunity now for these other ladies to make their mark. And, I think Holly's a fantastic champion. I think she embodies the spirit of what you want to come through from martial arts, which is a humbleness, which is a great skill set where she can mix it all round skills and be a truly rounded mixed martial artist. She remains a humble champion. She remains a very good role model who keeps a good tongue, keeps a good image, and, there's nothing fake about it. Having, hung with Holly, met Holly and commentated her fights, she is the preacher's daughter. She is just one of the nicest people you will ever meet. There's nothing fake or phony about it. It's just who Holly is, and I really like that.
No, absolutely. We got a chance to speak with the preacher post-fight as well, and he's a great guy too. Now, let's talk about this event. I mean, it was a monumental event here in Melbourne, Australia. What do you think it does for Aussie MMA? Do you think we'll see a big boom like we did after UFC 110 in Sydney?
Again, that's a really interesting question. It's a question that people have thrown at me a few times, and my crew actually asked me about it last night when we were making the drive out to either Foxwoods Casino, where I am at the moment on the East Coast. And they said, do you think that this is it? World record crowd in Melbourne, which I predicted 3 years ago on Inside MMA. I actually said, hey, when the ban is lifted on cage fighting in Victoria, UFC will go to Melbourne, they'll get their world record crowd. And they did 56,000 plus, which is fantastic. Will that then turn into a boom for MMA? I actually don't believe it will. I believe that they got the 56,000 because, A, Melbourne is the sports capital of the world. Okay, they're the most passionate sports fans in the world. And B, it was still a gimmick for a cage fight of such magnitude to come to Melbourne, so everyone flocked to that. Let me give you guys an example of what I'm trying to get across here. I don't know if you remember, but back in the year, it might have been like 99, 2000, somewhere around there. Do you remember that the sumo wrestling came to Melbourne at the Rod Laver Arena, and they had Akabono, they had Konishiki, they had all the biggest sumo wrestlers in the world come there. And I went to that event, and Rod Laver Arena was packed. I think they got like a capacity 15, 16,000 people in there, which was unheard of. It's bloody sumo, you know. But again, people turned out for the gimmick of it because it was promoted in the mainstream media. Everyone wanted to see what it was about, wanted to see these people they'd read about and these mythical big, 400, 500-pound sumo guys. But once the sumo left, you never heard about sumo again. Now, that's not going to happen to MMA because there's a big love for MMA, but I don't think it means we're going to start to be putting big bums on seats at events, particularly in Melbourne. I don't think it's going to translate to local shows going from having 800 to 1,000 people to having 8 or 9 or 10,000. To me, that just won't happen.
I guess one of the things that we noticed with UFC 110 in 2010 in Sydney was that after the UFC came down, you saw a lot more MMA gyms opening up and just in general more awareness of MMA. Do you think something like that will happen in Melbourne? And if not necessarily, what do you think it would take for there to actually be a big MMA boom in Melbourne?
There will be an awareness. There will be an awareness of the sport, and that awareness may translate onto television. Just an interesting point I want to make. There was a lot of people during the show, during the UFC, that were tweeting me saying, there's a world record crowd in Melbourne, but we can hear a pin drop. We can hear an ant fart. It's so quiet here at Etihad Stadium. What's the go? And I said to people, I told a lot of people it's going to be a very quiet crowd in Melbourne, A, because you don't have the redneck beer swilling audience in Melbourne that you do in a lot of shows in the USA, but also because Melbourne mixed martial arts fans and Australian mixed martial arts fans in general are highly educated fans. The reason being because we only have, 1 or 2 UFC events a year in Australia. The rest of our UFC viewing has to be done on television. We're watching TV in Australia. We're hearing Mike Goldberg, Joe Rogan giving us the expert commentary, breaking down the techniques for us, detailing it for us. Therefore, sitting in the quiet of our houses or at a pub watching these sports, we've become highly evolved fans. That doesn't necessarily translate as raucous stadium fans, but more so an appreciation of the technique being shown. And that's the reason why, even though you had a world record crowd of 56,000, it was still a very quiet crowd in Melbourne, much akin to the Japanese crowds you'd get, for the Pride days and the old Dynamite and K1 days, where you'd have 80,000 people at the Tokyo Dome, but you could still hear a pin drop. For the very, very same reason, is that these people weren't going there baying for blood and shouting out, put him in a body bag, or his ass sea bass, or any of that crap. These are educated fight fans who are, grown up with it, watching it on TV and knowing about the techniques and what to appreciate, instead of just, brushing it aside as a beer-swilling blood sport where they just wanted to see bones broken and blood flowing. So, getting back to what you were saying about a boom coming, I think it may translate better for television viewing because it's opened up a lot more people to the UFC. The fact that it's been mainstream in Australia over the last month or so, I think will endear a lot more people to watching MMA that perhaps weren't watching it as much before. But as far as that translating into local shows, I still think there's more people that are going to be turning out watching Muay Thai and boxing at a local level than there will be MMA, and that the change may or may not happen. And for it to happen, as you asked, I think it's just going to take a long time to try and to try and sway the mentality of the Australian sporting public away from their love for traditional striking sports such as boxing and Muay Thai to mixed martial arts, which is so much more ground fighting. And ground fighting is something we're not used to in Australia. You've got to remember that here in America, there's a huge pedigree, huge background in wrestling. Okay, everybody here knows wrestling. You go to junior, you go to high school, you wrestle. You go to college, you wrestle. Every high school, every college has a wrestling team. Wrestling events in Iowa, for example, get like 35,000 people. It's broadcast on national television here on ESPN. So there's a background in wrestling where people are exposed to it in America and therefore appreciate the wrestling, the ground game. In Australia, we have no wrestling pedigree. Our pedigree in fight sports is boxing. People of the older generation that grew up, watching your Anthony Mundine Seniors and your Johnny Famishons and your Barry Michaels and those guys boxing, and then those that grew up with, kickboxing, Stan the Man Longanides and Tosta Petrides and Steve Vick and Louis the Ice Isophides, and then in Muay Thai with your John Wayne Pars and Nathan Corbett and all these guys, Bruce McPhee. These are all striking sports. So it's very, very, very hard to get people to come more over to the MMA side of things where there's not so many knockouts happening. And whereas knockouts and the excitement of striking is what they enjoy so much and what they're used to.
Well, let's go over to Access TV and talk a little bit about Legacy Fighting Championships 49, which is actually on December 4th there in America. Now, fans are really excited to see this Derek Kratz defending his welterweight title against Alex Morono. For the fans that don't know much about the two, why is this fight so important, Michael?
This is a really good fight for Legacy. I think this is going to be one of their strongest cards. Derek Kratz, it's going to be his first title defense since he won the title last time against Brock Larson. D-Rock's like 17-8, Morono's 10-3, and this is a big step up in class for Alex Morono. I think he gives Derek Kratz a very good tilt. Kratz is a guy whose striking has come along in leaps and bounds, and his wrestling is fantastic, and he's tough as nails. And I think that for a welterweight championship, it's going to be a very good fight. And Legacy is a promotion that Aussies may not have heard a lot about, but it's certainly gained a lot of steam here in the US because they continue to send a lot of fighters to the UFC. Guys from Legacy who have gone on to the UFC are people like Holly Holm, for example. Holly won her first MMA title in Legacy and then went on to UFC. Sage Northcutt, who is the new revelation of UFC, fought on Legacy cards, and that's how he got propelled when Dana White came and saw him live, win a fight in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and sign him that very night to the UFC. Derek Lewis, who's in the heavyweights in UFC, also comes from Legacy. Daniel Pineda's another one. The list goes on and on. So fighters know that Legacy can be now a springboard to getting signed by the UFC. They know the UFC brass watch these fights. They pay close attention to them. And you feel that if Derek Kratz defends his title here, he could get a call up to the UFC. I think that makes it even more of an interesting fight to watch, just knowing that, hey, we could be watching the next Holly Holm, the next Sage Northcutt, the next Derek Lewis. And, that just makes it so much more tempting and titillating to watch as a contest.
Yeah, well, at Legacy Fighting Championship 49, there's actually two title fights. Ariel Beck and Andrea Lee are both fighting for the Legacy's inaugural women's flyweight belt. This is a pretty big deal. What can the fans expect from this one?
Oh, this is going to be great. Andrea Lee is one of my favorite, not even favorite female fighters, one of my favorite fighters, full stop. She's a kickboxer who's transitioned to mixed martial arts. She's 3-1 in MMA as a pro. She was 3-1 as an amateur. She's got a background in kickboxing, and she's stunningly beautiful female, just absolutely gorgeous. She talks with this beautiful Louisianan drawl of an accent. She wears the cowboy hat. I think she's perhaps one of the most marketable women in all of sports at the moment. And if she continues her winning ways and putting together her striking, she comes up a win last time at Invicta 14 over Rachel Ostovich. She armbarred her in the third round, if I remember correctly. She's beaten Shannon Singh. She's beaten Kim Colbert. Her only loss was a decision loss at Invicta 10 to Roxy Modafferi. I think big things are on the horizon for Andrea Lee, and for her to finally get a crack at a world title and do it on this very big Legacy card. I mean, if you really want to see someone like a Holly Holm who puts together the boxing and the kickboxing and puts it together well inside a mixed martial arts cage, you've got to check out this girl, Andrea Lee. She's phenomenal.
There you go, Andrea Lee, guys. Check her out. Now, Michael, we're going to do a little thing with you we call the Submission Radio Tap Out Round. Basically, we throw some fun questions at you, and you answer with the first thing that comes to mind, a lot like word association. So are you ready?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
All right. Who's been your favorite voice versus guest and why?
Stone Cold Steve Austin, because he's just an awesome dude, and I got a little bit drunk drinking beer with him.
There you go. That's a wrestling fan's dream. Now, Michael, what do you miss most about Melbourne since your relocation to Las Vegas in 2011?
My family, meat pies, fish and chips, and souvlaki from Oakley.
Oh, man. I've been Oakley quite a bit. They miss you over there. Now, the top 3 events that you've commentated that stand out in your mind, what are they?
2008 Beijing Olympic Games, K1 Grand Prix 2008, and being a part of the pay-per-view for Mundine versus Danny Green back in 2006 in Sydney.
All stellar events. Now, as a pro wrestling fan, Michael, give us your thoughts. CM Punk, does he have a future in MMA, or is this one fight and then go back to the pro wrestling deal?
Great question. Does he have a future in MMA? Yes, because we know he's going to have a fight, so there's definitely a future. As far as a long future in MMA, I think we'll have to take it after that first fight, but I don't see him returning to pro wrestling. I think he maybe has a few fights in UFC, and then he moves on to other things. Tremendously smart individual, highly marketable, great guy too, friend of mine, and I wish him all the best.
Well, Michael, name a dream match in MMA The Voice would put together if it was Joe Silva for a day. One dream match. What would you put together?
Oh, holy crap. Well, Joe Silva for a day, put together a dream match. That's a good one. You know what? Let's go with Fedor Emelianenko.
Mm-hmm.
In the UFC, because that intrigues me.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do him against someone like John Jones.
Yeah, there's a dream match right there. Now, Michael, we saw in your bio you always wanted to be an architect. Have you ever had one of those George Costanza moments where you've pretended to be one, like a Schiavello Vanderlei Industries?
I've never had a Vanderlei Industries moment, and I did want to be an architect. And it's one of those freaky things. I'll quickly tell you a story.
Sure.
When I was growing up, I wanted to be an architect so badly. And in year 10 in Australia, you ride away to do work experience somewhere for a week. And I rode away to about 20 architecture firms, and not only did they not write, they didn't respond saying no, they just didn't write back to me. And it was 2 weeks to go before work experience, and I remember crying to my mum, and I was 15 years old, and I said, "Mum, none of the architecture firms have written back to me. What am I going to do?" And my mum said to me, she goes, "You've got a good voice. Why don't you do radio?" And I'm like, "What? Get out of here. I haven't got a good voice. I don't want to do radio. I want to be an architect." She goes, trust me. Just listen to me. Listen to your mum. Do radio. Contact a radio station." So I said, okay, just to keep my mum happy. Wrote a letter to Triple M because they were the only station I listened to. They wrote back to me a week later and said, "Yep, come on in." Went into Triple M radio in, where was it, in South Melbourne at the time, Bank Street, South Melbourne. And I remember the lady's name, Deanne Sloan, and she came up to me and she said, "Hey, welcome to Triple M. What do you want to do on radio?" And I said, I don't want to do radio. I'm here because my mum said I've got a good voice, but I really want to be an architect. She looked me up and down and she said to me, "Well, I've got a good feeling about you. I'm going to stick you in the newsroom with our journalists." Guys, I tell you what, they put me in that newsroom, and within 1 minute, every idea I had in my head of wanting to be an architect was gone. All I wanted to do was broadcast media, and it was one of the best weeks of my life that I spent there at Triple M, and I kept going back there every summer, and that's why I never became an architect. That's why I have no Vanderlei Industries experience.
What a story. Well done, Mum. Now, if people don't actually know this, Access TV is owned by possibly one of the coolest dudes on the planet, Mark Cuban. Do you have a quick Mark Cuban story you can share with us that stands out in your mind?
A quick Mark Cuban story. Well, he's a big fella. He's like 6'3", and he's got a hard handshake on him. The first time I met Mark was at the a Super Bowl party a few years ago in Dallas, when Dallas hosted the Super Bowl. And I've been working for Access TV for, I think, about 8 months or so, but I'd never actually met the big man before. And was introduced to him, and he turned around and he saw me. He just yells out, "Good night, Irene," and wrapped me in a hug and made me feel very special and welcome. Mark, we are told, watches each and every show that airs on Access TV, and really still does call a lot of the decisions regarding Access TV fights. We're doing a Holly Holm special a 1 hour special on Holly Holm that was completely Mark Cuban's idea. So even for a billionaire who owns over 100 companies, who is, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks and one of the busiest men on the planet, he still finds time to keep his finger on the pulse in the mixed martial arts game and still dictate a lot of what goes on, the MMA content on Access TV.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, finally, Michael, with the UFC expanding here in Australia, we know you're doing a fantastic job over there in Legacy FC, but will we ever see The Voice do commentary at a UFC event? Is that at least one of the things on the bucket list?
You know what? I would love to do a commentary on a UFC event one day. I wouldn't necessarily say it's on my bucket list. But it's something that if the opportunity ever avails itself, I'd love to do it. Joe Rogan and I get on really well, and having done Joe's podcast a few times and spend time at his house with his family and on a social level. And, Joe's always saying that I'm his favorite, commentator, and I'm always saying that Joe's my favorite commentator, and it'd be a dream to be able to work with Joe Rogan one day. So, if that can possibly happen, I'd love for that to happen. And, who wouldn't want to work for the biggest and best promotion or the biggest and best, no matter what their field of personal endeavor is. So if that ever happens, that'd be great. And it'd be a long way to come from the days when I was commentating, Ultimate Promotions kickboxing in front of 200 people at the Sunshine Macedonian Youth Centre out in Sunshine. And, I'm just very fortunate to be where I am and have done what I've done and continue doing something I love.
Shout out to Sunshine. Keep going, guys. Now, in the meantime, you can check out Legacy Fighting Championships 49 on December 4th in America on Access TV, or to watch Legacy here in Australia, you can always check FightLiveTV.com. Follow The Voice on Twitter at Schiavello Voice. We really recommend it. He's got a lot of great tweets. Thank you very much for being on the program, Michael. It's been a real pleasure.
Casper, Dennis, thank you very much. You guys are known the world over, and you are doing some magnificent stuff with Submission Radio. It is my pleasure to be on it. I love hearing a couple of Aussie voices. I get sick of all these American accents, and I can't wait to get home to Melbourne in a few weeks' time and enjoy Christmas back home and have a couple of meat pies and watch some cricket. But good on you, boys, and keep up the great job.
Hi guys, it's Jana Jędrzejczyk, UFC strawweight champion. Listen to Submission Radio.
Our next guest will be fighting Royce Gracie at Bellator 149 in a big card. He is a legend in MMA fighting in companies like the UFC and also with a great pro wrestling run in the WWE. It's a pleasure to welcome back Ken Shamrock to Submission Radio. Ken, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back.
It's great having you, Ken. Now, you almost tricked us when Kurt Angle went out to announce the fight. Whose idea was it to do it like that and get fans to think that it was possibly a fight between you and Kurt?
I'm not sure. Not sure who came up with that. I kind of just, I just went with the program, and I didn't know who set it up.
Now, fans were a little bit disappointed when they found out it wasn't Kurt Angle who was going to fight you. We know it's a bit of a stretch, but do you think a fight between the both of you will ever happen, especially now that Kurt is seemingly working alongside Bellator?
For me, I love fighting fights that are fun for me, and that makes sense for the fans. So obviously that's one that does. It does sound fun. It does, definitely will make sense for me. But again, right now I have a big fight with Royce Gracie, and nothing right at this point in time really matters to me but that fight.
Well, Ken, you and Royce obviously have a bit of history. Why exactly did you want this third fight with him?
I've wanted it for a very long time. I've always felt like, the second fight that we had, I clearly won, although they didn't have judges. But for whatever reason, he keeps saying it was a draw, that I laid on him, and that, that I didn't come to fight to win. And it kind of stuck wrong with me because it's like, here's a guy that got carried out of the ring, who couldn't have gone another round, and was beat up pretty bad, and then doesn't give me credit. Whereas when I lost to him, I gave him credit. The guy beat me. They had to take a few things away from me in order for that to happen, like my shoes and things of that nature. But you know what? My whole focus was, okay, give me another shot at him, and I don't want to put any excuses in there. And so when I got the other shot at him again, they put the time limit in there, which was fine. But he got carried out of the ring, and he was literally beat to hell. And yet he still is putting the like the blame on me that I just laid on him and that I didn't do anything. And I'm thinking to myself, did you see the pictures? Have you looked at the fight? For you to say that, I mean, the gullible. I mean, how do you say that when they can get the hell beat out of you?
Well, Dana White was here in Melbourne this past weekend, and when he was asked about the fight, he basically said that two 50-year-old guys fighting each other is crazy, and he hopes that no one gets hurt. What do you think about his comments, and do you think people are right in being concerned about this matchup?
I think it's sad that we are at this point, after we've gone through so much in our world, to get across to people that you could do things, whatever you want to do, just as long as you're able to stay within the rules and the guidelines and be able to do the things you need to do to be able to do those things, and that you should never quit. You should always move forward and try to do things that you want to do, accomplish the goals that you want to accomplish. And yet we're standing here in 2015 and we are discriminating against age. I mean, when does it stop? I mean, we go in the ring and we fight just the same as anybody else does, and we pass the physicals and we do the things that we need to do to be able to get in the ring and fight. And yet we're standing here today after we've gone through the racism of black people, and we've gone through the women's rights and the Japanese, with World War, and putting them in the work camps because they looked Japanese. I mean, I thought we had gotten past all this, and yet today we're sitting here and we're discriminating against two individuals who have proven themselves in the world of MMA, who are at very, very high level and are very good shape and will pass any physical they need to get in the ring and fight. And we've got a few of the people out there that want to use discrimination as their case.
Well, it's an interesting point. Let's set the record straight, Ken. How is the body feeling? What kind of shape are you in now? And are you feeling like this could be a very good version of you come fight night?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I said, I thought when I got back in and I fought Kimbo, I really thought that I had that fight won, and I made a mistake, but I also believed that I wasn't allowed to continue fighting out of a bad situation. It was stopped very quickly. And I really believed that I was still coherent. I wasn't unconscious, and I really thought that I should have had the opportunity to be able to fight out of a bad situation, just as he did when I had the choke in, the full-blown choke in. And so, if they allow that fight to happen the way it should have probably happened, which is allow us to fight and for the fighters to finish the fight, I believe that the outcome would have been very different. But it didn't, and it happened the way it happened. But it should not take away the shape that I was in and the condition that I was in and the ability of what I was able to do in there. It shouldn't take that away. And I felt good. And my shots were smooth. I felt like I could take him down at will, and I felt stronger than him, and I was able to control him. So all those things going into that fight, I felt very confident and very good. Other than a few things that happened in it, was just out of my control, and there's nothing I could do about that. But other than the feeling and how I felt and my conditioning and everything, I felt tremendous.
And for all those people out there who are criticizing you because of that fight, because it did finish so quickly, what's your message to them? Like, what would your message be to them? Why should they tune into this big fight with Royce?
Well, I mean, it's if you're going to want to watch it, fine. It's a fight. And it's two guys that have been in the ring and have fought some of the best fighters in the world and still have some juice left in the tank. And if you want to watch it, then tune in. It's going to be a great fight. But if you're literally leaning on the fact that we can't get in the ring and fight anymore, then you're going to miss a great fight. So you tune in and watch it or don't. But like I said, I think this is going to be a great fight. I think two guys that really want to put an explanation on this trilogy that we're going to have here, and both of us want to win it very badly, and both of us are going to do everything in our power through training and through conditioning and through technique to win this fight.
Well, game plan-wise, what's your plan to take on Royce? He hasn't fought in a long time. Is any part of you underestimating him in this fight?
Absolutely not. The guy spends his whole life in the gym. Whether he's in the ring fighting or not, his technique and everything's going to be very good. So I'm going to do what I do, and that's go in there and impose my will.
The fact that you got into the cage recently and fought, potentially shaking off some cage ruts, do you think that puts you in an advantage over Royce?
I think anybody that hasn't fought in a long time comes in at a disadvantage no matter who they are, whether it's Royce or anybody else. When you don't get in the ring and fight for a period of time, you're going to come in at a disadvantage.
You guys are both known primarily for your grappling skills. What do you think? Do you think this fight will take place mainly on the ground, or do you think you might try and take advantage of Royce on the feet?
Well, I'm definitely going to take advantage of Royce on his feet, but I also believe this thing's going to end up on the ground. There's no question. But I think that whether it's standing up or on the ground, he's going to take tremendous punishment.
Because you guys obviously have that background, you've already had the 2 fights, this is a trilogy, this is kind of the one that, will sort of put an end to it. Is part of you wanting to go in there and submit Royce Gracie just to make, a huge statement? Well,
making a statement is winning a fight. Whether I submit him or knock him out is irrelevant to me. Royce is a dangerous person, he's got tremendous skills on the ground. He's got tremendous ability to be able to smother punches and be able to clinch and get a takedown. So, I'm going to go after what's there. But the one thing that will not happen is it won't go to a decision because I'm going to make sure of that, because I believe without a shadow of a doubt that if I impose my will on him and I come after him and I push the pace, that I will break him.
I'm just wondering, this thing's been going on for a while. How personal is this for you? What are your thoughts on Royce as a person and as a fighter? Is he someone that you have ill will towards, or is he someone that you respect because he's been in the game, for as long as you have?
I respect Royce for what he's able to do in the ring, especially in the early on UFC with his size and what he was able to do. He changed the world on how people thought about little guys fighting big guys. We proved it. And I thought what Royce did during those times was tremendous, and it'll never be done again. So I have tremendous respect for him on what he did. But what I don't have respect for somebody that isn't able to give credit or props or even anything to somebody who may have done a good job against him. He, for some reason, wants to make excuses of why something happened. That second fight that we had, he got beat up. And whether it was a win on the judges or not, I think it's pretty obvious he got beat up. And yet he'll come back and say, I laid on him and that I didn't fight him. And I'm thinking to myself, where did all those bruises and your swollen face and the blood come from if I was just laying on you?
Obviously, you guys have been around each other at some Bellator events. Have you ever had a chance to speak to him about those thoughts? Have you ever shared those feelings towards him about that he never really sort of gave you the props that you deserved?
No, because I figure those are things that, I want to stay cordial with people. I don't want to start any friction with anybody, especially outside the ring. So I just let it go. And but I've always, like I said, in the back of my mind, I've always wanted the opportunity to be able to get in the ring and once and for all, just shut him up. They're like, listen, I respect what he's done, and he's tremendous, and things that he did, and I respect that. But it's about time he starts giving respect to other people, not just himself.
When you say respect to other people, Ken, are you saying that he hasn't shown respect to other people other than yourself, or are we strictly speaking just yourself?
No, it's to everybody. It's Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and everything else sucks.
It's interesting because the biggest criticism of him has been that in a lot of interviews and a lot of things that he speaks about, he really doesn't sort of acknowledge the other parts of MMA. Would you say that obviously Gracie Jiu-Jitsu has done a lot for MMA, but there's been other factors in MMA that has helped the development of it to get to the point that it's at today?
Listen, it's like this. When I came into the arena and fought in the UFC, it was an advertisement for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and it was clinch and takedown. You didn't have to punch, you didn't have to strike. You could bring people to the ground, you could finish them there because it's the best style in the world. Well, I think we found out pretty clearly after about 2.5 years, that the strikers said, "Oh yeah, well we learned to stop a takedown and we knocked you out," and so it transitioned to the strikers winning. And then the rappers got smart and said, listen, we can't follow this tradition of being able to take somebody down and finish him because they're learning how to fight and stand back up. and we're getting tired, and then we have to try to shoot and take them down again, and pretty soon we get tired and they're going to knock us out. And so now we have to learn how to strike. So they threw out that thing that the Gracies had always said was like, just clinch, take them down, and you can finish them. You don't need to learn to strike. Well, that got thrown out after about 2 years of people trying to just do jiu-jitsu because they were getting knocked out after a while. So it evolved into what I brought into it in the very beginning, which was a well-rounded fighter, a striker, a guy who could punch and kick, but also do submissions on the ground. And I introduced that, the first one to be able to walk into that ring and do both. And that's what it is today.
Do you think that that's going to be another big advantage come fight night at Bellator 149, that you may be the more well-rounded fighter in that cage?
Well, and I say this, and I said it before, is that he needs to wake up and realize the game has changed. And he hasn't changed with it.
Now, it is an open weight fight. I mean, it's very interesting. What weight do you think that you'll come in at?
I'm not sure, but I know it'll be under 205.
Because I know in the Kimbo fight, Ken, you came around the 205 limit, and yet it was a heavyweight fight. Do you think you'll be over 205 or under this time?
No, I'll be under, because that's just where my weight goes. If for a long time I was able to hold 217 or 220, but I just can't hold that weight anymore. When I start training and I start getting in shape, I get around 199 and 202, and that's just where I'm at.
Now let's speak about the other big fight on the card, Kimbo versus Data 5000. If Kimbo does beat Data and you do beat Hoist, does a part of you want a rematch with Kimbo after the way things went down in your first fight?
Right now, nothing matters right now. What can and could be after this, we'll talk about. But right now, man, I'm telling you, nothing matters right now. The only thing is that I want to be able to have the opportunity to get in and go against Hoist and have absolutely no advantages one way or the other. Just two guys going in there fighting with the same rules and with the same advantages.
I'm just quickly on Hoist. He said something recently about how he may have the advantage. It's not so much about being younger than you, but because he's taken care of his body and he's been healthy and things like that, he thinks that will be one of the advantages come fight night. What do you think about that? Because from every time we've spoken to you, Ken, and had you on the show, you've always talked about how you've taken care of your body and lived a very healthy lifestyle as well.
Well, again, I guess he's not. He hasn't been paying attention very closely, because I've always taken care of my body and always made sure that I stayed fit. And so I'm not sure what he's saying or how he's saying it or what he means by it. But he'll find out come fight night that he's going to run into a wall of a guy who's very strong, in great shape, and is going to have a very good, very, very good movement on the ground and standing up. So I'm just interested to see how he's talking, because it seems like he's talking from the past, and he seems like he's talking from yesteryear. His confidence and his cockiness is coming from yesteryear, because he hasn't been in the ring in a while. I have, but he's still got that same attitude, like he's just going to walk in and take people down and sub them. And I think he's going to have a rude awakening.
How would one prepare for this fight? Obviously, in your last camp, you mentioned that you're really focused. I believe you stayed in a caravan and really focused on your training. What are you planning on doing this time around? Who will you be working with? What will be the game plan for your training?
Yeah, I'm going to be going to Dallas, Texas, and I'm going to be working with Guy Mesger. I'm going to bring back some of the old school guys. Even Frank may stop in, my brother Frank, a little bit here and there, and kind of give us a little bit of some jiu-jitsu tips and stuff on what we can do. So I'm going to bring in all the guys, the old school guys, to really help out with this one. So I'm going up to Dallas, Texas with Guy Mesker, and I'm doing my training camp up there.
Fantastic. Now, you recently did a video, I believe it was with Bobby Razak, where you mentioned how you're still pretty hurt by the comments Joe Rogan made about the Kimbo fight and how he alluded to it being staged. You mentioned that Joe hides behind his mic and says things that aren't true and that he should have come to you first. I'm just wondering, now that it's been a while, is there a way for him to make things right with you, for his comments? And are you planning on confronting him about those comments if you have an opportunity in the future, if you guys ever cross paths?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure why he said it. And I was pretty frustrated with it because, you're looking at ruining the guy's credibility and credibility. I mean, I'm not. People shouldn't say that stuff, especially when they're supposed to be in a position to where people are supposed to trust them. And they've been put in that position by the fan base, and they're holding these different talk shows. And if they say something, then they need to make sure that they're held accountable for the things that they're saying. And if it's not true, then something needs to happen, and he needs to be pulled off the radio. You can't do that when you hurt somebody. I mean, it's no difference to me walking up and punching somebody in the face. That's a physical thing, but what about ruining somebody's reputation or saying something that could ruin somebody's whole life? It's the same thing.
Is there, I mean, obviously, you've sort of had feuds with people in the past, such as like Dana White and other people, but a lot of those have been made right now. Is there something that Joe can do to sort of make things right?
First of all, if he was going to try to make anything right, he should go and remake his statement, because what he's saying is that he believes, and there's no facts or rhythm behind it, but it just looked to him. At least clarify what he's saying and not say that it was fixed.
Now, Ken, I know you're focused mainly on or pretty much solely on this Royce Gracie fight, but, being fight fans, we can't help but speculate and talk about the hypotheticals. Another possibly huge matchup for you in the future could be against Fedor Emelianenko. He's fighting in Japan in December, but if you both end up winning, would you somewhere down the road like to do a Fedor Shamrock super fight?
I don't know. Like I said, none of that's even been talked about. My focus right now is really focused on the fight February 19th against Royce, and really that's just my focus. After that, then I'll look to see what else is out there. But right now I really want that one, and I'm really focusing my mind and my training and my time just on that fight.
Now, Ken, before we let you go, because we know how busy you are, there was a very big fight here in Melbourne last weekend. Would like to get your thoughts on the Ronda Rousey versus Holly Holm fight. Don't know if you got a chance to watch it, but what did you think of it? Because a lot of people were blown away by the result.
I wasn't blown away. I felt like that if anybody was going to beat her, it would be Holly Holm. Because if you watched, and being a fighter, if you watched Ronda has always taken punishment in the first part of the fights with people that don't even know how to strike, people who were just banging with her. And Ronda got the worst end of all of that until she took him down. And then she was able to ground him out and submit him. But she took punishment from every one of those girls, and they weren't even really that great strikers. Now you got one that's an absolute stud in striking, and Ronda did the same thing she's always done, and all Holly Holmes did, which was the master plan, that to beat Ronda was to always back up, and Ronda's going to chase you because she's not afraid of anybody, and she can take a punch, and she don't mind taking punches. So Holly just said, okay, fine, I'll just back up, and I'll cater you. I'll keep punching you until you figure it out. And the problem with it is that Ronda never figured it out. Holly just kept backing up. She stepped in and hit her with a hook, a punch, whatever was there, bang, 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 she'd back up again. Ronda would come forward again and do the same thing, just walk straight in, bang, 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 and she'd back up. And pretty soon she hit Ronda enough to where she was off balance, and then she threw a kick and kicked her in the head. But Ronda has always been very, very, very bad about defending strikes.
Well, let me ask you this, Ken. Do you think that Ronda can come back stronger from this loss and potentially become champion again? Or do you think that stylistically wise, Holly Holm is just too tough of a matchup?
I think it's going to be a tough matchup, but I think she can do it. I really do. I think if she'll change her game plan, which I really thought, and I was surprised that they didn't change it up because of who Holly is. Holly is a great striker. She's not a journeyman. She is a professional. And I was really shocked to see the game plan that they came in with her coming forward like that, just walking straight in, because that was the method of beating her, was letting her come to Holly and Holly back up and just keep punching her and backing her up with the jab and hitting her with the right hand. I mean, it was a perfect setup, and I was really shocked that the training staff in her corner did not make her circle or at least try to back up and get Holly to come to her. It was like constant forwardness, and it was a recipe for disaster.
Well, just quickly, and we'll let you go in just a second, Ken, but let's say you were training Ronda. Let's say she was in the Lion's Den. What advice would you have given her? What do you think the game plan would have been in that fight? How do you beat someone like Holly Holm?
I'd have had her circling to the left and circling to the left and try to get around her and keep pressing forward, but don't punch. And press and make Holly throw punches and then get under her and take her down, or at least get her to the fence. But don't punch, because that's when she's open. I would have not made her like she does every time, is come straight out and straight in and just go forward. I would have had her circling the ring and changing angles and keeping her hands up and try to force a clinch. But, she just came straight out, straight in and throwing punches. And, Holly's a pro. And, there's just no way she can win that battle.
She's definitely in a point in her career that she's never been in, losing in a way like that. You've been around the sport for a really long time and you've seen it all. If Ronda Rousey was listening to this program, what's one piece of advice you could give her to sort of bounce back from this whole situation?
Well, I'd go back and look at the tapes of her last 4 fights, 3 or 4 fights, and watch the transition from those fights going into where she lost the fight. And she'll see it was the same thing over and over again. She would come in and do the same thing she did in that fight. The only difference was she got a professional in there that was a professional striker. Wasn't a journeyman, but was a professional, one of the best in the world at striking. And so look at that and then understand how you beat that. And how you beat it is not standing in front of them, keeping your hands up and try to circle and get a clinch, not to strike with them.
Well, Ken, obviously the big focus in your life is Royce Gracie on February 19th, the Bellator 149. Before we let you go, we got to know, what's the prediction, the official prediction? How are you beating Royce Gracie, Bellator 149?
Nah, I don't do that because that's always a bad jinx. I'm going to take whatever happens out there. I can guarantee you this. It won't go to a decision. I will make sure that the fight gets finished. I'm not going to be standing out there trying to win points, man. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to finish the fight.
Well, there you guys go. Check Ken out at Bellator 149, February 19th. Take on his longtime rival, Royce Gracie. And follow Ken Shamrock on Twitter at ShamrockKen as well. Check out his website, www.kenshamrock.com. Lots of great stuff there. Ken, best of luck, and thank you for coming back on the program.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys.
Hey, this is Alistair Overeem, and you are listening to Submission Radio.
Our next guest is coming off a big TKO win at UFC 193 in his rematch with Antonio Bigfoot Silva. He recently released his autobiography, Born to Fight, which has been critically acclaimed as one of the best MMA autobiographies in years. Mark Hunt, welcome back to Submission Radio.
You guys, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, it's great to have you back, Mark. Welcome back, man. It was a huge weekend for the world of MMA last weekend in Melbourne. There's been a photo circling around on social media of you and Holly Holm taking a selfie at the post-fight press conference. Before we get to your fight, tell us, did the outcome of the Rousey-Holm fight surprise you? Were you shocked like us?
Not really, no. I wasn't surprised at all.
We got to know Holly a little bit while covering the event, and she's a great person. The Aussie crowd really seemed to embrace her during the week and after the win. After spending some time with Holly post-fight, what were your impressions of her? Because she seems like a great person.
Well, she's a nice person, and just like Ronda's a nice person. But fight's a fight, and she gets caught. What do you know? Someone asked me the same question, and I said, obviously, it'll probably be the main event, Holm or Rousey, and I even called her at the backstage. She's going to get a high kick, and that's what she got. I was like, oh, wow. Mm-hmm. But, both girls are good girls, and it was just Holly's night the other night. So, yeah.
So just to clarify, so backstage, who was it that said that they were going to hit a high kick? Was it you or was it Holly? Who made the prediction?
Oh, I did. We were just, all of us were watching in the back, but the kick went out, and I said to the guys in the back, are you going to give her a high kick? Yeah, that's what happened. So, I should have made a bet on it,
Yeah.
Well, let's move on. Let's move on to your fight with Bigfoot Silva. How did you feel on the day of the fight in Melbourne compared to Adelaide? Did all the hard work at AKA Thailand pay off? Did you feel a lot better on the day of the fight?
No, of course. There was no weight cut. It was just I was eating and drinking, so I felt really good.
The fight was a short one. Did it go the way you planned it? And at any point, did you hurt your hand at all?
No, it didn't hurt my hand at all. It went the way I planned it. I was just thinking maybe I should prolong the fight, but then I thought, stuff it. I might as well just get out of here and try and get another fight in the year.
You've been in some massive, massive shows over in Japan, obviously, with K1 and Pride. What did it feel like going out to a crowd of 56,000 people in Melbourne? What was that feeling like for you?
It was great. It's always great to walk around in front of a huge crowd, especially if it's in your own backyard. So I felt really, really good about it. I was ready to put a show on. I trained really hard for it, and it was good.
How did this one compare? Because obviously fighting in Japan is a bit of a different story. The crowds react differently. How did this one compare, the Melbourne crowd, to back in K1 and Pride?
That was right up there. It was really good. Like I said, it's always good to fight back at home, and this one was up there with the rest of them. So.
Now, many fans are critical of Bigfoot's performance. In the last 5 years, for people that don't know, he's been TKO'd and KO'd quite a bit. Do you think for health reasons it may be wise for Bigfoot to possibly be careful moving forward in his career from obtaining too much head trauma?
I don't think so. I mean, shucks, he wouldn't have gotten into this business if he was worried about head trauma.
Well, you mentioned at the post-fight press conference that you're open to rematches. If you got another shot at Stipe if he beats at Arlovsky, how would you see the rematch going? Would it be any different?
Be the same way it happened with Bigfoot. He's going to get knocked out.
Well, I mean, it is interesting because JDS is fighting Overeem in December, and I'm just curious, that's another possible rematch. Who do you think will win in that fight between JDS and Overeem?
I don't know. Now that they've got the stricter drug testing in there, I don't know who wins out of those two. Depends on if Alice is cheating or not. I mean, he's known for cheating before, and that's probably what'll be the difference. I don't know.
Although, obviously, with USADA coming in and Alistair passing every drug test, do you think it's fair to assume that he'd be clean for this fight?
Well, you want to hope so. you hope so.
Well, out of the possible rematches, I mean, there's a bunch of them for you. There's the one between you possibly and Stipe. There's the one between you and Overeem, JDS, or Werdum. Which one stands out to you as the one that you'd want most? If you had the choice, which loss would you want to avenge first?
The guy with the belt is the one I want.
Mm-hmm. The which one, sorry?
Got the belt. The guy with the belt. That's the one I want. I already know that I want to get that to clear off, get into the top five, win a couple of these top five fights. So, but I'd like to fight that guy with the belt.
Hey, you don't care who it is. It doesn't matter whether it's Werdum, Cain Velasquez. Cain Velasquez could be an interesting one. He's someone you've never faced before.
Yeah, I'm interested in the guy with the belt at the moment. That's what I'm interested in. But really, UFC put me with, then that's fine. So.
Well, you've mentioned that UFC is where the party's at. There's going to be a big party in Brisbane in March. Would you be RSVPing to that party?
Of course. RSVP, right?
You can count Mark Hunt as attending the Brisbane show. Have you spoken to anyone by any chance? Have you spoken to the UFC about possibly fighting in March at that card?
No, we tried to talk to Dan about getting on the Korean card, but I guess I won't be making it just on the card. Yeah.
Well, another fight that fans have never seen but have been talking about, and this is a possibility for Brisbane, is a fight with Frank Mir. I mean, Mir's boxing skills have improved. I'm just wondering, is that a fight that you may be interested in, and do you think he'd be able to stand and exchange with you in the octagon, even though his boxing skills have improved?
Of course. I mean, it's the top-end fighting, so, I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, of course his game's improved, so is mine, but that's just the way it is, and if it's Frank Mir and that's it, it's fine with me, whoever it is.
I'm just wondering, with that career card that you mentioned before, Mark, who would you be looking to face? You say you want to get on that card. Are you was it Anthony Hamilton, or were you looking to possibly fight someone else, like altogether, like Ben Rothwell?
I have no idea. I just wanted to get on the card. It didn't matter who to me, so I had 2 fights left in my contract, and I probably wouldn't get on the card anyway. I just asked if I could.
How important is it for you, Mark, to sort of do have fights lined up back to back because you're in phenomenal shape? Is that one of the reasons why you want to fight so soon? Because you're in great shape and you'd rather fight while you're in that great shape?
Yeah, I know. Since I've just hit that, I put on like 10 kilos already. So, so I put 8 kilos on in 2 days. So, that's what happens when I end up freaking in camp or training. I end up being a fat ass and start putting on weight.
Well, we can understand. We love our food as well. When you say you put on all that weight, is that just because you sort of cut weight before the fight, now you've put it back on, or is that just enjoying life, celebrating the win, and eating some good food?
Just relaxing and chilling out and eating whatever I wanted to.
Well, let me ask you this, Mark, because last time we had you on the show, you spoke about possibly going vegan later on down in your career, but for the time being, maybe going vegetarian. I'm just wondering, how have you gone with that? Have you sort of stuck with it? Because I know vegetarian and vegan is a pretty tough thing. Have you cut out meat altogether, or are you sort of back on the protein?
Well, I said, I was going to go. I said I'll go when I finish fighting.
Yeah.
It was just assumed to run with it, but I eat meat or whatever, chicken or whatever it is. I think when I finish my career, that's when I'll be eating, trying to go vegetarian and vegan in the end. So yeah, I'm eating everything.
Another big change that's happened before this last fight, was the release of your autobiography, which we have to say, Mark, is one of the best MMA autobiographies that we've read. Just wondering, I mean, I know you spoke about this a little bit at the scrum before your fight, but what has the feedback been like from fans about the book? What kind of messages have you been receiving?
It's been a good feedback. I had a lot of people messaging me about changing your lives and helping them. That was the main thing I wanted to write the book about, to help others, and that's what's happened. So it's really good. I had a lot of movie offers and things like that. But, I'm sort of glad I did it in the end now. So, at least it's helping people out there that's in the struggle. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because obviously in the book you spoke about some of your past, some of the things that you've done. Is it interesting to you that now, at this point in your life, it's almost like you're a great example for a lot of the young people coming up, in difficult situations like you were back when you were younger?
Yeah, of course. It doesn't. For my stuff, regardless of the cards you're about in life, you still got to deal with the situation and try and get on the right path. And then when I see those people that say, they're always making excuses, having a bad life, I've had this and this happened to me, this and this happened to me. It's just not the case. You just can't use that as an excuse. So it's not a good thing. When they say that, I say that's just pretty weak. You use those bad things to help you change your life, not stay doing bad things. So, martial arts changed me for the better. So I don't know, I don't know what's up with some of these people and their excuses. So yeah.
Yeah, well, in the book, you finish it. Sorry, continue, Mark.
Sorry, keep going.
No, go.
No, keep going.
I was going to say, in the book, you finish it off in a pretty, I don't want to spoil the book for anybody, but in the end, you basically say something along the lines of that you'll keep fighting while you can still make weight, and then being able to enjoy your food and being able to enjoy life, then you walk away from fighting. I'm just wondering, you mentioned you've got the 2 fights left on your UFC contract. Do you think you'll be able to make that weight for a while longer past these 2 fights?
Yeah, of course. Of course I'll be able to do it. Of course there wouldn't be an issue with weight cutting or fighting. I just, like for myself, if I, probably my last one. If I get injured, then that's probably it, But God knows what's going to happen with anyone's career or life. So, yeah. Also, when talking about the book, helping others with their lives in different situations, and also, with opening for management groups to help fighters and entertainers with their careers and their fighting paths. So to help them get in fights and get looked after properly instead of falling in all the pitfalls that I fell into, to make their fighting career a lot difficult or their entertainment career difficult. So, I've had a lot of experience in that sort of field.
Oh yeah, well, like we mentioned, you've had an incredibly storied career. We've had a chance to go over it in that book. If you could sort of go back in time and change things, would you change things? Do you have these things that you regret you would change, or would you sort of continue down the same path because those are all the things that made you the person you are today?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't change a thing apart from some of the stuff that's probably not in the book, but I probably wouldn't change a thing apart from those things. Like you said yourself, I wouldn't be here probably still doing what I'm doing at my age and still fighting, So, no.
It's interesting because the book sort of finishes at this point in your career. It does seem like you have a lot more highlights coming up. Do you see a second book coming out at one point? And how would you see that book going? How would you see the second Mark Hunt book going?
Well, I don't know. I don't even want to write this book. I don't know when I air my dirty laundry out in public, but here we are and talking about a book. So I didn't want to write this book. So I don't know if I want to write another book. It'd probably be she'd have to do a lot more persuading than she did last time for another book. So,
well, I'm just wondering, once you fight out your contract and you stop fighting and being an actual active fighter, do you think you would ever do anything like run a gym or do anything else to sort of like, I don't want to say help other people because it's not necessarily your responsibility, but do you think you'll stay in the fight game, or do you think you just sort of retire, enjoy your time with your family, sort of maybe move away from the fight game?
Oh, we're like I just said before, we're looking at opening a management group for helping younger fighters and entertainers in the business. Like they don't fall in the pitfalls I fell into. I'm also talking to another guy, a friend, who's going to open up gyms and things like this. So yeah, all those that you just said is correct.
The stories in your book about how sort of managers and people took advantage of you are just mind-blowing to the average reader who doesn't really know what's going on in fighting behind the scenes. How many of these entertainers and how many of these athletes have you run into who have had a similar stories to yours where managers try and take advantage of them? And how important do you think it is to educate them about, being able to be smart with your money and trusting the right people with them?
Oh, it's happened to history. A lot of fighters are just, that's just the old story. People getting treated by men. Like Tyson, I don't know, fucking gazillions of dollars. While I was going through an arbitration with my manager, David Toole was just in the call with his, he got ripped, I think, $20 million or something. Mine wasn't that sort of scale, but I feel my first contract I signed with my manager was worth millions. So, It's of course a lot of fighters need help because they don't know how it works and how this game works. Someone that's been there, already done that, understands and knows how it works. So it makes it a lot easier for them to just fight and win, without worrying about stressing out about money and contractual stuff and organising themselves. So that's the good thing about being already at this stage in my career of fighting, as opposed to being starting off like a lot of people. People will never say hi when you start in this business. Only when you start making it, they say hi.
No, absolutely. We can definitely understand that. And you're winning on all tracks. You won your big fight recently. And another thing you're winning in is obviously your clothing line, Juggernaut. Before we let you go, we just have to ask, there's some new additions in jackets and hoodies that people can check out. What are a couple of the new pieces of clothing fans need to go check out now?
We're just... it's a work in progress as always with Juggernaut. And, you can just go check out the website. I just have a few issues at the moment with the Juggernaut branding, but nothing we can't sort out.
Yeah, no.
Nothing that a bazooka won't fix.
A bazooka.
just on that, does it look like Mark Hunt's going to keep having the Juggernaut line, or is a possibility that it may not be around in the future?
Of course, I'm always going to have a fighting line. It's just it's always a work in progress with different things going on with it. It's a work in progress like everything else, and we'll get to the bottom of things and sort things out. Yeah.
Yeah, well, all right, guys. Well, for now, make sure you do check it out. It's at www.jugnt.com. Go get Mark Hunt's new book, Born to Fight. We're being honest right here. It's a fantastic read. It will absolutely make you respect everything that Mark's done even more. It's just absolutely amazing. You can grab that at www.booktopia.com.au, or also you can grab it from where all good books are sold. It's across a whole bunch of stores. And also follow Mark on Twitter at MarkHunt1974. Mark, thank you so much for coming onto the program. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, guys, and talk to you soon. Take care.
So there you have it, guys. Mark Hunt interview back on Submission Radio. Again, we do apologize. We can't apologize enough for the horrible audio in that one. It's definitely not one of our proudest moments. I think in the future, when we get Mark Hunt back on the show, we're going to have to do it through Skype just because it's a lot more reliable. So thank you so much for putting up with us, guys. We're going to talk about a few things, namely UFC Mexico, and then we're going to close out the show by talking about UFC 193, just our experience, a few backstage sort of things, and our take on, obviously, the main event, among other things. But to kick things off, UFC Monterrey. Dennis, an eventful card. A few things you wanted to mention about the prelims, correct?
Yeah, just a couple of things to quickly mention from the prelims, Cass. Andre Fili had a great performance against Gabriel Benitez. Basically, he finished him off with a combination of head kick and punches. It was a very, very good performance from Fili, who was touted as the future of the division, but has had some tough losses, most recently losing to Pepe by flying triangle choke. Now, he is fighting out of Team Alpha Male. Everyone says he works very, very hard and has a lot of potential. And we saw a glimpse of that on the prelims. Also on the prelims, a veteran. So going from a young up-and-comer to a veteran, Scott Jorgensen had some issues after he got a kick and actually twisted his ankle in the fight. He did going into at the end of the first round. He fell to the ground, wasn't really able to get to his corner. The referee asked him if he could make it to the corner. He got up, sort of limped over there, jumped over there. In the second round, came out there and started to put a bit of weight on that ankle. But unfortunately for him, rolled it again and ended up tapping out to the fact that his leg was hurt, his ankle was hurt. So when it comes to Scott Jorgensen, obviously he's a legend in the UFC. In the last couple of years, though, out of the 7 fights that he's had, he's only won 1. And this was his 3rd loss in a row. Because he's done so much in the WEC, he's one of those sort of Josh Koscheck type guys, one of those relationships with the UFC where they respect him and they give him a lot of opportunities. My question, I mean, I'm not really going to ask you this, Cass, but what I'm really interested in seeing is if they give him one more fight or not. Because obviously he has been losing a lot, and it's just another sort of disappointing loss for Jorgensen.
Well, he's done it before. He did have 3 losses back-to-back to Uriah Faber, Zakhakovsky, and Jussier Formiga at one point. They gave him another shot, and he beat Danny Martinez, the man who fought at UFC 193 just this past weekend. Unfortunately, he's on a bad skid again, losing Wilson Reyes, Manny Gamburin, and Alejandro Perez just recently at UFC Monterrey. So it is the big question. Will they let him off the hook one more time and give him another shot? I hope they do, because he is a veteran of the sport, but I guess one has to wonder how much longer does he really have left in this sport? You know, a bit of a late start, started in 2006, but he's had a lot of wear and tear and a lot of miles on his body. So I can't imagine Scott Jorgensen really sticking around too much longer, at least not in the UFC.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the big thing I always look for is how many KO losses do they have back-to-back, because obviously you don't want to see a guy get too much head trauma, and a lot of his losses are via decision and submission. But, I mean, it does look like his body just is starting to give away a little bit, and there is such a thing as hanging around for too long. Obviously, freak injury, rolling your ankle, it's not exactly like he looked terrible in the fight. Even on one leg, he actually put up a good fight, but still, it's going to be interesting to see if he gets another shot. He was sort of one of the main guys in the division, and now he's sort of worked his way down to the prelim cards, kicking them off. So can't imagine it's an easy road for Scott Jorgensen.
Yeah, I want to talk about some of the bigger fights on this card, some of the more storied ones, and I want to kick it off with the last 3 fights. So we'll start at Henry Cejudo versus Jussier Formiga, the man we just mentioned a few seconds ago. This was a very pivotal fight. Obviously, Henry Cejudo really campaigning for that title shot. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say campaigning. I don't know if he's been all that active in terms of campaigning for the title shot, but he is another guy that's looked at as possibly the future of the division, possibly a big threat to Demetrius Johnson. Jussier Formiga, guy who's been around for a long time, very much improved boxing, very improved striking. He's already got a world-class ground game. Henry Cejudo in this one, he was very good at controlling the range and coming in with strikes and then out. Anytime Jussier would load up on a big hook, Henry Cejudo would close the distance, come in closer, and he'd be out of range. He did very good mixing things up nicely in the clinch with punches and knees. He got the takedown right at the end of the first round just to solidify the round, and with only 10 seconds left, Formiga's dangerous ground game was largely nullified because he didn't have enough time to work. Overall, what do you think of the performance by Henry Cejudo, Dennis?
I think it was a impressive performance because he was able to show what he's sort of capable of, but at the same time, it does seem like he's holding back a little bit, and it's not really a performance that's making me jump out of my seat and yell, this is going to be the next big thing in the division. Obviously, incredibly talented, incredibly smart, the way he talks, his strategy, but I don't know, I'm still not sold on Cejudo as the man that could beat Demetrius Johnson. I was impressed by his performance, but it wasn't exactly crowd-friendly, as in, I don't know, the crowd didn't really appreciate it. Obviously, he's a big star over there in Mexico, and even by the end, after he said the Mexican line, I mean, people weren't really jumping on the Cejudo bandwagon. The way that he fights, it's very calculated, but it's not very exciting. So this win, it didn't sort of get rid of any of the question marks that I had about him. I mean, he did what he does well, but I'm still not blown away by him. What about you?
I think if you don't get a huge pop in your own sort of home country or a country of your own ethnicity, you're probably not going to get a big one abroad where you're fighting in a much more neutral sort of territory. Again, the flyweight division, it's pretty thin these days, and a win over Jussier Formiga, that's a really big win. That's very impressive, and I feel like Jussier, in a lot of ways, he shut down mentally after maybe the first, definitely by the second round. The fact that Henry Cejudo was able to do that, it shows a lot of good things. As far as deserving the next title shot, yeah, I don't know. Even though it was a good win, I think you either got to, if you don't give him Demetrius Johnson, you give him Joseph Benavidez. The only problem there is if Benavidez does beat him, there's another prospect that's sort of out the window, and there's not really too many more at flyweight these days. And if Benavidez does beat him, what do? Do you give Benavidez another title shot, which, again, I don't think a lot of people are clamoring for. So, and the other thing is Cejudo's weight issues. If you do give him Demetrius Johnson, will he be able to make the weight? Will he be able to make 125? It looked like it was a tough weight cut for him. It didn't really seem like the weight cut affected him. So in theory, it doesn't look like these weight issues plague him during the fight. But just making the weight, I mean, Dana White and the UFC, they'd be stressing to put this guy on a title fight and have him, miss the weight by 1 pound and make 126 instead of 125.
And when you look at the top 10 in the flyweight division, you just wonder, like, who do you give Demetrius Johnson if you don't give him Cejudo? Like, the only fight that makes sense to me, maybe a rematch with Benavidez. I'm just looking at the top 10 here. Benavidez is number 1, Dodson number 2, Formiga number 3, McCall number 4, Cejudo number 5. You got Hiraguchi number 6, Moraga at number 7. I mean, you got Makovsky at number 8, Ortiz number 9. I mean, out of that cast, I don't even know who you give him. I mean, if you don't give him Cejudo, I'm just not sure what you do. And I don't know. Cejudo said that he believes that Demetrius Johnson's game is based around his wrestling, which is sort of true. One of the things I worry about Cejudo is that he's quite slow compared to Demetrius Johnson, and Johnson would just pick him apart. So it's one of those cases where I'd love to see Cejudo have a few more fights and get a bit more ready, because I do think Demetrius Johnson will beat him. But at the same time, unless you give him Benavidez, I don't even know what you do with Johnson. It's sort of crazy. Unless you do like a super fight or something, and you go, all right, Demetrius, have a super fight with like TJ Dillashaw. But that wouldn't make sense because Dominic Cruz is back. And see, I don't even know what you do with him. I don't even know. Bantamweight's
getting somewhat packed up top. There's way more tantalizing fights there. Like, obviously you're going to do Dillashaw versus Dominic Cruz. But if not, I mean, a Sun Sal's another one that you could do. Uriah Faber, now that's a possibility. You got Aljamain Sterling, you got Brian Caraway, Thomas Almeida. So bantamweight's getting pretty packed. Meanwhile, flyweight isn't. It's a bit of a struggling division. I think in a way, you have to give Cejudo to Demetrius Johnson. Otherwise, Demetrius Johnson's going to be on the shelf for a while. By the time you book Benavidez versus Cejudo, by the time that happens, any possible injuries or bans or anything like that afterwards. So it really looks like the only possibility now for Demetrius Johnson, unless he's content to have a bit of a holiday for about 6 to 8 months, you got to give him Cejudo.
One of the guys that I like in the division is Lewis Smolka. Obviously, he fought over here on the Sydney card and obviously had that big win over there in Dublin. I think the UFC should really get behind this guy because the way he fights is really exciting. I really feel like if he was more out there in sort of more star power, more push behind him, if he got a few more big fights and he was able to win him, he could be a good guy to build up for Demetrius to fight down the road. But when I'm looking through the rest of this flyweight division, apart from Joseph Benavidez, I'm not very excited about what I see. There's just not very much going on, especially in the top 10. Yeah, there's just not much.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Smolka's ranked 13th at the moment, on par with Chris Carriaso, who's also ranked 13th. I think there's a bit of a skill discrepancy between him and Demetrius Johnson, and also being ranked so low in the division, he's going to have to get, I don't know, like at least 3 more wins before people are even talking about him getting a title shot, and that's a tough call. Some of the guys up there, like Zach Makovsky or Dustin Ortiz or even John Moraga, they're all very stiff tests for Louis Smolka. But at this point, really, I only see Cejudo as a possible contender for Demetrius Johnson, unless for whatever reason, I don't know, you give him Ian McCall, which even that wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, and you got Sergio Pettis down the bottom there at number 15. Hopefully he can build some steam as well, so there's some new faces in the division, because really, And I know we spoke to Demetrius Johnson, and he's keen on fighting as much as he can as well. So it's a really tough position for him in the UFC to be at. Definitely. Unless it's Cejudo, you can't headline a pay-per-view. There's no way around it.
Well, Demetrius kind of reminds me of Benson Henderson. When Benson Henderson, all he wanted to do was break every single record. And Demetrius Johnson's kind of on that path as well. He doesn't really care who he fights. He just wants to rack up the numbers, get as many wins as possible, and break any record there is in the UFC and be considered one of the greatest of all time. And, he's sort of on that path. And I know a lot of people aren't necessarily on the Demetrius Johnson bandwagon, but if you get like a massive record, like, you look at, say, Mayweather, where he's 49-0. I mean, regardless of all the controversy, you look at a number like that and it's incredibly impressive. And I think that's kind of what Demetrius Johnson is trying to get, just these massive, outstanding numbers.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, almost like in featherweight with Jose Aldo, they need to get a Conor McGregor type guy in there to really shine light on the division. And then I think a lot more people will appreciate him once he beats that guy. So it's interesting. It's funny because a while ago we were saying similar stuff about Jose Aldo and that division. Now it's one of the most popular divisions, obviously because of McGregor. They're headlining UFC 194, which is going to be possibly one of the biggest pay-per-views of the year. So it's funny how things turn out. They really do need someone to walk in there and shake up the division. Cejudo is a good kid, obviously, says the right things, but he's definitely not a Conor McGregor. He's not going to bring as much interest as Conor McGregor. So still waiting to see who sort of goes for that brass ring and tries to shake up the division a little bit. It'll be interesting.
Well, the closest thing we got was John Dodson in the things that he was saying about how Demetrius Johnson's a plague on the division. I'm going to make things exciting. The fight before he fought Demetrius wasn't the greatest, and obviously he's not like Conor McGregor in the sense that he's going out and knocking people out left, right, and center. He's had a few injuries. He took time off, which, funnily enough, was when Conor McGregor got some of the most notoriety when he was out for, about a year or however long it was, and he was tweeting people and saying he's going to kill the division, and that's really when people started talking about him. But yeah, as far as John Dodson, it just was nowhere near, not even close to that level of Conor McGregor-ness. And of course, that was the biggest fight, Dodson versus Demetrius Johnson 2 in the division. Now it's happened and Dodson's lost, and not only that, he's gone to a completely different division, so that's completely out as well.
Yeah, and Ian McCall, he was almost Conor McGregor-esque at some points, but now he's talking about sort of possibly even retiring from the sport, and he hasn't had a great run either. Like a fight between him and Demetrius Johnson at this point wouldn't really make sense. So there's a draw card from the division that's possibly on his way out, and that's a shame as well.
Speaking of people somewhat on their way out, let's talk about Diego Sanchez versus Ricardo Lamas. Before we talk about the fight, let's just talk about Diego Sanchez dropping down to featherweight and just how crazy that is. I mean, him going, middleweight, welterweight, lightweight, and now all the way down to featherweight. Him and Kenny Florian, some of the only people that have ever done that. And I just got to say, he looked incredibly, incredibly drawn in at the weigh-ins. Did you watch the weigh-ins? Did you see him stepping up on the scales?
Yeah, no, it was a scary sight. It's one of those things. I mean, we speak to Gunnar Nelson about these things. We speak to other guys in the sport. The weigh-ins and the way the structure of the weigh-ins is, you see some of these guys really take advantage of that. And it was crazy to see Diego Sanchez do that to himself. It was absolutely nuts. And later on, he went on Instagram and put out a picture of himself where it seemed like 24 hours later he had put on 26.2 pounds and was weighing 171.2 pounds. How about that, Cass?
It reminded me of two people. Christian Bale, the Machinist. That's the first one I always think of. And James Irvin, the Sandman, when he dropped down to, I think it was middleweight. I want to say middleweight. And he just looked like alien-esque, like incredibly drawn out. But in saying that, because when I saw Diego at the weigh-ins, I was like, man, what are we in for when he fights a guy like Ricardo Lamas, who's at the top of the division? It was actually a good fight. It was a really fun fight. I wasn't sure whether Diego would still be able to bring it. A few things I noticed as soon as the fight started. The size difference is very apparent. Diego obviously being the much bigger guy. The speed difference definitely favored Lamas. Ricardo Lamas was clearly the faster man, but they had a good scrap. I mean, the only thing is, I thought if ever there was a time for Diego to go back to his wrestling, this was the fight, because on the feet, Lamas was clearly faster. He was clearly more technical. Diego never really been known for his striking as much as he's been known for his heart and his aggression and just his willingness to keep fighting through injuries. Before I sort of go deeper into it, what was your thoughts, Dennis?
Yeah, I was really impressed with Sanchez. It really looked like he worked on his wrestling. The exchanges between him and Lamas were really impressive. So interesting to watch. I mean, a lot of people talk about how boring grappling is, but that wasn't boring whatsoever. Amazing switches back and forth. I mean, I was really, really impressed. Sanchez obviously listened to the fans and went back into the wrestling room with Izzy Styles, Israel Martinez over there at Greg Jackson, Winklejohn, and really worked on that. That was really good. I was obviously super impressed with his heart, getting the leg injury, staying in the fight, inviting Lamas to scrap on the fence, and that massive cut over his eye at the end there. I mean, he really brought it. And I'll tell you what, Lamas is a super tough guy. I actually think he's definitely one of the best guys in the whole division. And I didn't really expect Sanchez to be able to hang in there with him. I really thought Lamas was going to probably destroy him.
Yeah.
And I was super impressed with the fact that not only was he able to hang in there, he had a few really good moments against him. He had some good elbows when Lamas was trying to take him down. He cut him open, had some good stuff on the ground for him. And even when he invited him into a couple of crazy exchanges, he was able to land a couple of punches here and there. So I really expected Lamas to beat him early. And the fact that he was able to hang in there with Lamas, I guess, for me, sort of solidified the fact that who knows, maybe perhaps featherweight is a good thing for him. Also, he was in great shape and didn't get tired straight away. So that was good to see as well. What did you think of the fight, Cass? What stood out to you?
Look, I mean, it was a really fun fight, and technically it was not an amazing performance by Diego, even though he had some really good switches in there, and obviously he lost the fight. That's one of the main things, but I was more impressed because I thought we were walking into a massacre. I think this was a massive mismatch. You've got Diego Sanchez, who, I mean, the last few years definitely haven't been kind to him. I'm just looking at his record now. I didn't realize that he didn't fight last until Ross Pearson. That was like a year and a half. Everybody remembers that controversial decision to Ross Pearson where he technically won, but everyone and their mother believes that he lost. Before that, he lost to Miles Jury. He lost to Gilbert Melendez. He beat Takanori Gomi in a split decision. Before that, he lost to Jake Ellenberger. And before that, he won against Martin Kampmann in a fight that a lot of people thought should have gone to Kampmann. So technically, his last legitimate win, and I hate to be that guy to take something away from someone, but you know, if you're looking at his last real legitimate win, it was UFC 121 in 2010, where Cain Velasquez beat Brock Lesnar. That's how far back we're going. And then you go up against someone like Ricardo Lamas, who, again, was a guy who recently fought Jose Aldo, was gunning for a title shot. Yeah, he got brutally knocked out by Chad Mendes, but I don't think that takes a lot of steam away from him. And a guy that is obviously very comfortable in the weight class, to a guy like Diego Sanchez, who's making his first dip into the division, I thought it was going to be all Ricardo Lamas. And it wasn't. It was a back and forth fight. The other thing that I was really impressed with was Ricardo Lamas. In general, he looks to be hearing the criticism on his style being sometimes not the most exciting, and he really mixed it up in this fight. He was throwing variations of spinning kicks, spinning back kicks. He was throwing spinning elbows, and in general, just looking to throw caution to the wind at times and really going for it. Sometimes he didn't pay off for him. Sometimes he got caught by Diego. But I appreciate what he's trying to do because it looks like he's campaigning for another title shot.
Yeah, he looks great, and I think it was a good outcome. It was a fun fight for the fans, like you mentioned, Cass. It wasn't the massacre that we thought it would be. Fans really enjoyed it, and you got Lamas back, ready to go. Who knows what's going to happen to him next? And with Sanchez, I mean, I guess he'll bring some star power to the division. I mean, there's a lot of light on the division with Conor McGregor, but once Conor McGregor goes, or once they want to build up some of the lower guys on the rankings, I suppose Sanchez is a good way to go, and a guy that can hold together a card. So interesting to see what happens with him next. I imagine he'll fight at least a few more times at featherweight.
Before this fight, I was really thinking this is probably going to be one of, if not Diego Sanchez's last fights. I actually think this breathed a lot of, a lot of light to him, a lot of life into him. And I got to say, man, there will never be. I don't know if this is too much hyperbole or hyperbole. I don't even know how to pronounce it, but there will never be another Diego Sanchez. I mean, the way he just welcomes punishment. You talk about Mark Hunt being born to fight. I mean, it's literally his title of his book, and Mark Hunt said it many, many times, saying, God put me on this planet to fight. The very same thing can be said about Diego Sanchez. I just can't give him enough credit, whether it's wise or not. As fight fans, we really appreciate it. The way his leg looks like it was destroyed, temporarily crippled, and then he went up against the fence and sort of said, bring it on to Ricardo Lamas. I mean, he's like the Terminator. When the Terminator had like one arm and he's still like crawling on the ground. Like, Diego Sanchez will never go away. So for that, I just have to take my hat off to him. win, lose, or draw, very, very impressed by Diego Sanchez and his heart. It's good to see that at his age, with the amount of mileage on his body, he never looked for a way out of that fight, and he's still got as much heart as he's always had.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when the match first went up on the screen, you saw both guys were 33 years old. Yeah. And then you think, man, is Diego Sanchez only 33 years old?
Yeah.
He's been around forever. He's been around from the start. He was an Ultimate Fighter 1. He's had all these wars. It's just crazy to see how much fighting he's actually put in 33 years. I mean, relatively a young man, but his experience in the fights that he's had, you'd think he was a lot older. So it's crazy, crazy stuff.
And I'm just going to say, I still stand by what I said. This was a very big mismatch. You got a guy going for a title, ranked number 4. You got Diego Sanchez, who just really hasn't had any great wins. Massive, massive mismatch. I would like to see in his next fight, Diego Sanchez's fight, I mean, he doesn't even have to fight anyone in the top 10. It can be somewhere in the top 15. But if you're going to give him someone in the top 10, Diego Sanchez, give him someone like Dennis Bermudez. Dennis is a guy who's not quite on Ricardo Lamas' level. He's ranked number 9. He's had a few losses, but he likes to scrap. He has exciting fights. He had that very, very exciting fight against Jeremy Stevens, which finished with an amazing flying knee. Unfortunately, Dennis Bermudez lost that one. But I think even then, you've got 2 Latino guys. If you want to do that in another Mexico card, or maybe it wouldn't make sense in Brazil, but you could put that on any card, and that's going to be a fun fight. That's if I had to pick who to give Diego Sanchez next, I'm going Dennis Bermudez.
Yeah, so much fun fights for him. I reckon Dennis Bermudez would be great, even a Jeremy Stevens, because both of those guys would just stand there, take each other's heads off. I mean, it's great to see. I think a lot of fans are a lot more excited to see Diego Sanchez back in this division. So it's worked. The fact that he was able to breathe some new, fresh air into his whole career, I think it's worked so far.
Let's talk about the main event. Kelvin Gastelum versus Neil Magny. Bit of controversy. By the end of the fight, people were talking about which man won. Before we sort of get into it, what were your opening thoughts on this fight, Dennis?
Just blown away by Magny, the fact that he was able to fight like that with 2 weeks' notice, and also blown away with Gastelum, the fact that he was able to hang in there for 5 rounds. Obviously, cardio has been an issue for him in the past. And so I was impressed with both guys. I was also disappointed with both guys. I mean, without getting too much into it, Magny with his reach, not being able to keep Kevin Gastelum a distance, not using that jab, not using that reach to keep him back. KG was able to get in and close the distance pretty much whenever he wanted to. Also, Magny moving back very quickly, not trying to cut angles. When he gets on the fence, he did the same thing over and over. He ducked down, which is very predictable. You can time that. In that regard, I was very disappointed. And the fact that he looked amazing on the ground, I was super amazed by the fact that he was able to do what he was able to do from the clinch, the takedowns, the slick transitions in his jiu-jitsu game. It was very, very impressive. Obviously, we didn't get a chance to see that when he fought Damian Maia. It was quite the opposite. Yeah. And Kevin Gastelum, I was very impressed with the fact that, obviously, like I said, he has the gas in the tank to be able to do that for 5 rounds. I was impressed with the fact that he didn't give up. He had some good exchanges on the ground. But then again, I was disappointed with him as well. When he was moving back, he was very susceptible to strikes. He didn't throw a very high output. It looked like he was trying to let it go, but really couldn't. And there were parts in that fight where I wasn't as impressed with him, and he wasn't at the level that I thought he'd be at. What about you, Cass? What did you think about it?
See, with Magny, I actually think he put a lot of things together. Obviously, he's been working extensively on his ground game. I think as far as the standing, I think he did a good job of keeping Kelvin Gastelum at bay, and then when Kelvin Gastelum would close the distance, a lot of the times Magny would initiate that, and the range was fine, I think. I think when he had him on the outside, he'd pick him apart with shots, and when he'd close the distance, he put him in the clinch, and he put him up against the cage. So I think Magny fought a very, very smart fight. I was, like you, very impressed with the fact that he was able to go 5 rounds with only 2 weeks' notice, and he's a bit of a rare case because there's always been the talk of Neil Magny always staying ready. He's the new age company man. We've had a lot of guys like that, like Josh Koscheck and Rich Franklin and countless other guys. But
Donald Cerrone. He's the new Donald Cerrone.
Well, there you go. Yeah, and there's been comparisons to those guys for a while now. But yeah, Neil Magny, just a tremendous amount of fights and always ready to fight. And yeah, I can't state enough. Going 5 rounds, I believe that's his first time ever going 5 rounds, Neil Magny. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's his first time. So that's pretty crazy. And doing that at only 2 weeks' notice. Kelvin Gastelum, you mentioned you were disappointed in him. Yeah, it was a bit of an underwhelming performance for him just because he was the favorite in this one, and there's really no excuses for this one. Like, he had the full training camp, he was ready to go, the UFC paid for his nutritionist, which we've spoken about on the show before, is something that I'm against. I don't think the UFC should have paid for that. I think Calvin should have done it. He's a grown man. It should be his responsibility. The only thing I will say, and Brian Stan pointed this out, obviously, with Matt Brown, you get a very different game plan. Matt Brown's going to come forward. He's going to try and get into a war. Neil Magny, a much better grappler. He's going to hang on the outside. But in essence, I think if anyone would have any excuses, it'd be Neil Magny because he's coming in on only 2 weeks' notice. So this was Gastelum's sort of coming out party. This is a good way for him to get back on track. Unfortunately, he fumbled the ball. The big question is, did the right man win? A lot of people discussing that third round. What do you think, Dennis? Did the right guy get his hand raised?
Well, according to when I watched the fight, and again, maybe I need to rewatch it one more time, I had Magny winning the first 3 rounds and Gastelum winning the last 2 rounds. We also put out a poll on our Twitter. 76% believe that Neil Magny won, while 24% believe that Kevin Gastelum won. What about you, Cass? What were your thoughts on that?
I agree. I think the right man won. Magny, in my opinion, won rounds 1, 2, and 3. I actually rewatched the third round. For anyone who didn't, there wasn't a lot of output per se. There wasn't a lot of damage. Neil Magny definitely won the first minute. Kelvin Gastelum did very little. After that, Gastelum was sort of stalking Neil Magny, but didn't really do much. In terms of wrestling, I think Magny took Kelvin down about 3 times, possibly more, and I don't think Gastelum got a single takedown. So even though there wasn't a lot of damage dealt, Magny definitely controlled the round. 100% I give that round to Magny. So yeah, 1, 2, 3, definitely for Magny. And Kelvin Gastelum, one of the things that, we learned about him is that, yes, he can go 5 rounds, and he has a tremendous amount of heart. The fact that he came back in round 4, dropped Neil Magny, and then even finished strong, very, very impressive. His weight issues, they seem to be a thing of the past, and I'm hoping that in the future, Kelvin Gastelum has to pay for his own nutritionist, not the UFC, because it's just not fair on any other opponents that he faces, but if he does choose to stick with George Lockhart, it seems like his weight issues are a thing of the past. If he eventually does climb his way to a title shot, you can give him that title shot and not have to worry that he's going to not having to miss weight. The other thing that we learned about him, he's not quite ready for that title shot that he almost got promised when he faced Tyron Woodley and Dana White was talking about. He's not quite ready for the elite people in the division. And in saying that, Magny is still outside on the fringe. He's top 15. He's not top 10. So Gastelum, he's got to go back to the drawing board and work on a few things. But it's a very, very impressive win for Neil Magny. He didn't put the exclamation mark on it. He did get dropped at the end, but for a guy who came in with only 2 weeks' notice and went 5 rounds, I'm very impressed with Magny.
Oh, yeah, and 5 fights in 2015. So for people that don't know, he did lose to Damian Maia at UFC 190, but bounced back with a split decision win over Eric Silva. Now this is a second split decision win in a row. I mean, a guy with a very, very busy year. And I love it. I love to see a guy jump back in there and try and take it all back after a loss like he had to Damian Maia, where people sort of thought it was sort of the beginning of the end of his hype train. It's great to see that he went right back into it, and look at him now. He's back to being, one of the most hyped sort of up-and-comers in the division. So great job by Magny, and 5 fights in 1 year. Congratulations to him on that as well.
There you go. That's the end of our chat about UFC Monterrey. I know it's a lot quicker than usual. We decided to skip over some of the tough finales and the prelims to focus on the biggest stories. But something else that is still a big story in the sport is UFC 193. We wanted to talk a little bit about our experience because it was a pretty hellacious week or 4 or 5 days or so while it lasted. And obviously a lot of big stories coming out of that event. Ronda Rousey, the queen, being toppled, Holly Holm becoming the new champion. So Dennis, I'll let you take the reins for this one. Where are we starting in this very broad general discussion?
Well, I've been dying to talk about this. Fans asking us about our experience and no one really being able to hear what our thoughts were apart from the post show that we do with Errol Hawani. So let's get into it. Let's kick it off. Let's go on to Wednesday, Cass. Wednesday here in Australia. You and me, we took our videography team and we went down to the hotel. We had some interviews set up.
I'm just going to correct you. I think that was Tuesday, actually. Are you talking about Hector and Valerie and Edmund and Swick?
Yeah.
That was Tuesday.
Tuesday, okay. All right, yeah. So Tuesday, I've got my days mixed up.
Yeah. Hey, it was a crazy week, man. I didn't know what day it was at any point. We barely slept, so
that's right. So Tuesday. Sorry, everybody. Tuesday, we rock up. We go to the hotel. We got our team ready. We get in there, and we've got some interviews lined up. First one, Cass, was one of the ones that I want to talk about is Mike Swick, a guy that's had a great relationship with Submission Radio. We got a chance to spend some time with him, see what he was like after the retirement. I mean, great guy over the phone, but this is one of the first times we got a chance to spend some time with him. What did you think about the guy? Because this guy, I mean, I was just impressed with the fact that he is just such a funny guy. Not a lot of people know Mike Swick has a funny side.
Yeah, he was talking about us capturing the riot. I didn't realize that Mike Swick's got a big gap between his teeth. I think he's missing a tooth. And we were doing the interview. He was joking about how, make sure you guys get my good side and things like that. Having a lot of laughs with him. No, he's a fairly sort of introverted guy. But when you're around him for a while, he comes out and he's got this funny side to him. What did you think, Dennis?
Yeah, no, he was a great guy and just solidified the relationship even more. Expect to see a lot more Mike Swick on Submission Radio. We moved on to Edmund, who's Ronda's coach. And this was an interesting one, Cass. When we went up to the hotel room and we spoke to him, you pointed out to me that even at one point in the interview, he got a little bit emotional. It really seemed like this relationship with Ronda Rousey is super special to him. We got a chance to sort of picture it firsthand. What were your impressions of Edmund? I mean, he's under fire at the moment because of his strategy for Ronda Rousey, but all that aside, what did you think about him after we sort of had that face-to-face chat with him?
Well, yeah, it happened twice during that week. One time when you were speaking to Holly Holm and the other time with Edmund. And I believe it was your questions you were asking about the relationship with him and Ronda Rousey. And I could be wrong. You guys can go back and watch the video, but it looked to me like he might have gotten a little bit choked up about it. So you can see there's something very special there. And all in all, a very nice guy. I have nothing bad to say about him. We'll talk a bit about the coaching and things about, what happened at UFC 193 later on. But, all in all, very nice guy. And actually, after that, he said, I like that question at the end about, the relationship and the dynamic between me and Ronda. That's never been asked before. And, when you do interviews, sometimes you never really know what questions are liked, what questions are enjoyed. You never really, not that you don't know when you piss someone off, but sometimes it's very hard to gauge. And with Edmund, he's kind of that guy. He doesn't really let a lot out. He speaks very monotone. He's kind of, in a way, got a poker face. So I guess for whatever reason, he enjoyed that question, but just something that we have to bring up. One of the things that people say to, why didn't you ask about bankruptcy? Why didn't you ask about Ronda Rousey's mum's comments? Well, that's one of the things that we weren't allowed to ask. So when he went into that interview, it was strictly about UFC 193. So if anyone's wondering, why didn't you ask those questions? It's not the fact that we didn't want to, we wanted to, but out of respect for for Edmund, not to say that we were ever given an ultimatum, but basically it came down to either doing the interview or not doing an interview. And we chose, we'll do the interview, we'll talk about UFC 193, and we'll leave that stuff for a little bit later on.
Yeah, it was an interesting chat. Pop on the channel and check it out. I think a lot of people have checked it out and have some positive comments about it. One of the things I noticed about Edmund Cass is he's very meticulous, very detail-orientated, runs on a schedule, and like you mentioned, big poker face. So it was just very interesting. We were on the whole floor, just to paint a picture, they had the whole team on one level, I believe. Guys were walking up and down in the hallway. He was coming in and out of the room. It was a very interesting way for us, I guess, to get to know Edmund and the mentality behind how he works. So it was a great experience. And then moving on to the last guys of the day, Hector Lombard and Valerie. We had a chat with them. We went up to their hotel room, Cass. For people that don't know, obviously they're together in a couple. It was a very interesting dynamic. I mean, I got to say, possibly one of the sort of best dynamics that I've seen when it comes to couples. Valerie, she's very stern. Hector, he likes to have a bit of a joke around. And we had a great time in their room, didn't we, Cass?
Yeah, it was interesting because it seemed like they were a little bit apprehensive at first about doing the interview, even though we'd had Hector on the show a number of times. Turns out something happened, and I don't want to name names, but there was... Valerie did an interview earlier on. I don't know whether it was that day or the day before, but a journalist pissed off Valerie just by the way they went about the interview. Hector Lombard, being a fairly emotional guy, he was pissed off by that as well. So when we spoke to them about doing an interview, it was very different to the day before, where I believe Hector's words were, anything for you guys, which we were like, oh, okay, well, Submission Radio, feeling pretty special. The next day, he was very reserved. We sort of got up into the hotel room, we had a chat. They broke down the story, and obviously because of the whole USADA situation, there were certain things that they did and didn't want to talk about. There's a pretty crazy story about, USADA, Hector Lombard's failed drug test, and we're actually going to hopefully get Hector and Valerie back on the show hopefully soon as possible. I don't know what exactly Valerie, what her situation is as far as when to talk. Obviously, she just lost to Joanna Jędrzejczyk in the title fight. She was very distraught after that fight, but they were spitting fire and they had a lot of things to say when the cameras weren't rolling, and it's something that hopefully we'll get to capture. But other than that, we started the interview, they had a lot of fun, they had a lot of laughs, and you can check that out on the channel as well. There's a really good dynamic between those guys.
Yeah, and one of the things that I noticed was Lombard, a bit of sadness, in the fact that he wasn't able to be on this card. The fact that he was happy for Valerie while at the same time sort of a bit disappointed that things turned out the way they did. And here he is, a guy that's fought in Melbourne, and a guy that, a lot of people know as it was in the scene when it wasn't that big here, missing out on being a part of the biggest UFC card and a huge, huge card at Etihad Stadium. You could see he was disappointed, but at the same time, he had a really good poker face. He was there to support Valerie, and they did just that. It was a hilarious interview, and you guys should definitely check that out on the channel.
Well, that's the thing. If you watch the way the interview went, it was very lighthearted and very fun, and we focused on just talking about the actual fight against Joanna. But before the cameras were rolling, we sort of spoke to Hector about being disappointed and not being in Valerie's corner. And Hector, it was not funny, but it was interesting to see the way his whole demeanor changed, because first he was laughing and joking, and he was like, I love doing interviews with you guys. I like working with you guys. Which, I'm not trying to sort of blow smoke up our own asses, but it's just not something that we expected. With Hector, you never know what you get. So when he said that, I was kind of like, oh, okay, cool. And then 5 minutes later, we're talking about him not being able to corner Valerie, and he was legitimately pissed off. I think there was a lot going on in his mind. He was sort of playing out the scenario. He was reliving it. And Valerie actually had to say to him, calm down, relax, don't worry. We're here to do sort of a more fun interview. And I think that's why they didn't want to talk about that or the USADA situation, because it literally would have been another half an hour conversation. Valerie let us in on quite a few other things. Hector actually spoke to I forget the name of the guy. He's in the UFC. He's kind of captaining this whole anti-doping thing, but apparently the guy said to him, and I feel like such a schmuck not knowing or forgetting his name, but he said to him, had he been in charge when Hector failed his PED test, he would not have been suspended, because apparently the thing that Hector took, which was, I don't know, some pill that is on the list but doesn't actually have any performance enhancing properties, the guy said to Hector, you would not be suspended. And that's why Hector Lombard was so pissed off, because had things been handled, I don't want to say properly, because who am I to say whether they were handled properly or not, but had they been handled the way they are supposed to be now, he would have been cornering Valerie. So that's one of the reasons why he was pissed off, and why they didn't want to bring it up in the interview, because it would have been a very downer interview, and it would have been half an hour of sort of talking about other things other than the fight.
And we're sure Hector will pop on in the future and discuss that. Now, moving on, the next day was the big open workouts. And we were very interested, me and Cass, to check out how the UFC was going to set up this event, because obviously, for people that don't know, Melbourne's a crazy place. For example, a couple of weeks ago, there was a tornado that went through the city, first ever tornado. Then a couple of hours later, it was hot as hell. So you don't know whether to bring an umbrella or sunny. You bring your board shorts, your umbrella, you bring it all. You bring some sunblock, you bring some sunglasses, maybe a funny hat. Do whatever you want. We don't judge you. But anyway, the big open workouts. We rock up, Fed Square. The crowd, I'll tell you what, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how many people there were going to be. So I wasn't disappointed with the amount of people that were there. There were people that were there from the very onset, from early on, who wanted to see everybody. And then later on, as Ronda Rousey came out, it really did get quite packed. So actually, I think a pretty good turnout for Melbourne. The UFC was able to set up the workouts under a little roof, so if it rains, it wouldn't affect anything. And me and Casper decided we were geniuses, because we went to the local $2 shop and got a couple of cameras to make sure the interviews that we shoot for you guys
mean umbrellas?
Umbrellas, cameras. That's
we
right.
didn't get our cameras from the $2 shop. They were state of the art, but we got umbrellas from the $2 shop.
That's right. So we get the umbrellas from the $2 shop. We hide them under our bags. It's a sneaky backup plan in case it rains. Make sure the shots are right for you guys. One of the biggest stories to come out of the whole thing, though, Cass, was Holly Holm and her open workout. What did you think about it? Because it was one of those moments where it sort of opened everybody's eyes to her personality, her fun personality.
Well, it's interesting because, and when we said this when I was speaking to Ariel Helwani in either the pre-show or the post-show, I don't remember, but it's very contrasting to how she was the very next day. But at the open workouts, very fun, very jovial, very playful. She was dancing. She was, doing the robot or something. She was just, in general, having a lot of fun during a workout, smile in her face. She brought out a fan. I imagine the UFC PR team was shitting themselves, but she got a fan to come up and sort of like play around and spar with her, and she told the fan to, really kick her and let her have it and kick her in the stomach, and, they were sort of going shot for shot. It's something that I never expected from Holly Holm, and it's one of the ways that we sort of were led into just how relaxed and calm she was for this fight and how mentally strong, or at least on that day. The next day is a different story, but we'll get to that in a second.
It was funny because you mentioned the UFC guys. I was on the side there, a different spot from Casper, who was closer to the stage, and I heard the UFC guys, and at first they were laughing, having a great time, going, "Can you believe this? Look at Holly Holm. This is great." Then when she invited the fan on stage, everyone got a little bit quiet. Everybody got a little bit nervous because the fan threw some heat, man. She was going for those kicks. Like, she was going for a knockout bonus. So it was crazy. And another funny story about the fan is this fan, she was up the front. She was really passionate. She got a bunch of photos with different fighters and got up on stage, was the star of this open workout. I mean, if you guys go on YouTube, it's probably one of the most watched things from the open workout. And then later on, me and Cass were hanging around. The UFC did a charity event called Oz Harvest, which helps feed needy children. And she was actually one of the judges there, so she got a free meal out of it as well. So I'd say this fan had a pretty good day, Cass.
Oh, yeah, she was sitting there eating with Ross Pearson and Joseph Benavidez and Juliana Pena and Claudia Gadelha. So, if you're a UFC fan, which obviously was, or an MMA fan, yeah, clearly she had a great day. What are we talking about next? And just one thing, that day was supposed to be 17 degrees and raining. So Dennis and I were there with our jackets and our coats and like jeans and shit. People are coming up to us, they're like, "Why don't you take your jacket off?" I'm like, "Pit stains, man. Leave me alone, all right?" Besides, I've got my outfit done. I don't want to tuck in my shirt. I don't want to take my jacket off. It was horrible. It was like, I don't know, 28 and sunny. We were dying, man.
It was hilarious because there was this one scrum where Valerie came out and a guy got in my way. I wasn't able to get in with the microphone, but Team Submission Radio, I know how you guys all like to listen, so I jumped up under there and I was on my knees on one leg for about 7 minutes. And for those who don't know, try holding a microphone up in front of someone's face for about 7 minutes. I was dying. I was like the old Kevin Gastelum that people thought didn't have much cardio. I didn't know if I could make it, but Casper looked over at me a couple of times, and that's all I needed, Cass. There was some encouraging looks. He liked my Greg Jackson. He looked over at me. I kept the microphone up. I don't know how I did it. I probably could never do it again, but I did it on one knee. It was almost like I was proposing to her with a question. It was crazy stuff.
You were proposing with a microphone. It was like one of those telepathic conversations that we had. You looked at me, you were dying, you were like, "I don't think I can do it much longer." And without saying anything, I was like, "Tacos after this?" "I agree, man. Good call."
And then our videographer looked over at me and went, "Meow, meow, 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 meow." And then he was fired. Nah, he's a great guy, Justin. Big shout out to him from Blitz. Now, Cass, moving on to the next day, because obviously there was some great scrums there, but that's some of the stuff that stood out. The media day. For those that don't know, the media go to this thing called the media day, where you go over
media day, in fact.
Ultimate media day, that's right. Which makes me think, is there like a prelim media day for like the worst events where they just don't put an ultimate in front of it? But anyway, lots of interviews, lots of opportunities for interviews. Casper, you did the long yards. Let me ask you, because I did the scrum with Ronda Rousey at the open workouts. Nothing really came out of that one. What were your thoughts? You were pretty close to Ronda. You saw how she was conducting yourself. What were your thoughts? You were there for almost an hour holding a microphone in front of her face, asking her questions. What were your thoughts about how she carried herself, how she was going into it mentally, and just overall and generally on Ronda Rousey?
Yeah, and my arm and shoulder still hasn't recovered to this day. It was like 45 minutes of holding that mic out, fully outstretched. No, as far as Ronda Rousey, the one thing that I'm really, really impressed about is the amount of questions that she got asked and the way she answered them. Like, she got asked so many slight variations of the exact same question, and every time she would answer with something different. Like, me personally, we talk about, fighters promoting themselves and like, "Oh, why don't you go to this press conference? Why don't you, stir up a storm? Why don't you say this? Why don't you call people out?" And when I was standing there listening to Ronda Rousey ask all these questions, and I always thought, like, if I was a celebrity or whatever, and someone was like, let's do an interview, and I did like 10 interviews in a day, I would always try and give different answers to get people, as much bang for their buck for their interviews, like we hope from our guests. Hearing those questions for Ronda Rousey, I was like, my God, I would abandon that in like 5 minutes because she was asked seriously the same question in so many different ways and just, questions that you would just expect Ronda to be asked like a million times. Like, how do you feel about, inspiring women. How do you feel about being a big star in the UFC? How do you feel about this? How do you feel about it? It's just the same questions over and over again. And every time she never sighed, she never rolled her eyes. There was never any generic answers. There was never any like I said before, It was always a different answer. There was always a lot of passion behind her. And it not to say that she won me over, because I always had a lot of respect for Ronda Rousey, but I got a lot more new respect for her because she's, I don't want to say intense, but she's very good at everything she does. Obviously fighting, she trains hard and things like that, but even as far as media, she's extremely, extremely good. Actually, we spoke to Forrest Griffin that same day, and he told us a funny story. It wasn't necessarily a funny story, but just an interesting story where back in the day, someone was like, hey, look at Ronda Rousey. She was still, I think, new, maybe fresh out of Strikeforce, and she was signing autographs, and Forrest Griffin was already kind of on his way out of the company. He was a little bit over it, and he was, not to say that he wasn't as enthusiastic with fans, but for him, it was just another day. And someone said, hey, look at this chick, Ronda Rousey, look at her, Forrest. And he said, yeah, well, we'll see how she is in the next 4 years. And he said, according to him, she's exactly the same as she ever was. And I witnessed it firsthand, the way she's captaining those questions. So a lot of respect for Ronda Rousey. If it was me, I would just, record like one answer and just like on a cassette recorder and just replay it for the next 45 minutes.
Yeah, I don't know how she does it, because so many dumb questions going her way, and you get a lot of casual. For people that don't know, you get a lot of casual media members, from the big channels over here in Australia and internationally as well, and they won't actually ask about the fight. They'll just go for something different, and it'll always be like, how do you feel about being an inspiration for women? How do you feel about people getting paid, equality, all that kind of stuff? While all the other media members are actually trying to get down to the nitty-gritty and ask some good questions. So you were over there for about an hour, I think. So I went over. I had a chat to Holly Holm. You mentioned the interview a bit earlier when we were talking to Edmund and when we were talking about the open workout. I had a chance to speak with Holly Holm. Not that many media around her initially, quite a bit, and then eventually everybody went over to Ronda and Joanna and that kind of thing. So she was sort of sitting there by herself almost. I jumped over, had a bit of a chat with her, complimented her on her hair to kick off the interview. And that's one of those questions where midway through the question, because I think I said something like, Holly, let's talk about the most important thing about this whole thing. Your hair, it's long, it's nice. Halfway through that question, I was wondering if I was going to be dragged out by UFC security for being like the creep, the ultimate media creep. But I was able to finish it off, comparing it to Lyoto Machida, and all respect was restored instantaneously. I had a really good chat with her. And
just quickly, for people going, what the hell does Lyoto Machida have to do with this? We've got this ongoing joke, because Lyoto Machida has the sponsorship from Head and Shoulders, and we've always been baffled by that. Like, there is so many. I mean, hey, he's got a good rug on there, but there's so many other nice hair pieces. Holly Holm, beautiful hair. Luke Rockhold, he's got some luscious locks. Uriah Faber, and the list goes on. So we're always baffled by Lyoto Machida, having this Head and Shoulders contract. But hey, he's got the contract, so everyone's hair is basically playing second fiddle to Lyoto Machida. But Holly Holm, she makes a good run.
That's right. I mean, a White House petition needs to be put together by our listeners after this, trying to figure out what's going on with this whole Head and Shoulders thing. But no doubt about it, no dandruff for Lyoto Machida. But yeah, we had a chat, and she's a really interesting person. She's pretty quiet, and she looked a lot more nervous. She looked a lot more, I guess, not willing to really sort of share what's really going on in her mind, but she was giving a little hints here and there. I asked her if she ever considered not doing this MMA thing because she had all these injuries and issues getting into the UFC. She said no. I asked her if she'd be in boxing if she wasn't here. She said no. I even suggested maybe she'd be an Olympic swimmer or something. And she said, well, I'm an athlete. I got to do something. But it was near the end of the interview when I brought up Coach Wink. And for people that don't know, Coach Wink has been with her from the very start. She got a bit emotional, and you can't really see it as much on the camera. But I was standing right next to her, and there were tears in her eyes. They didn't come out just yet, but they were there. They were about to come out. She spoke about how much this opportunity means to her, and in particular, how she feels like she wants to deliver for all the people that were there for her, and no one was really there for her from the start like Coach Wink, and how amazing the moment would be when they win. And it was just really interesting to see, and just just great to see how much of a great person she was and what was going through her mind and how she was worried, Cass, about delivering for these people that were with her from the beginning, not even worried about herself in the fight, what was going to happen. She's worried about Coach Wink. She's worried about her family, worried about everyone that's put work into her. She just wanted to deliver for everybody that put the work into her. And that kind of baffled me because it's a really selfish thing in a lot of ways to say. So it was a really interesting interview. I think if you guys do get an opportunity, jump on the channel and check it out.
And watch out for that moment right at the very end. You probably could have asked one more question, and I think the waterworks would have started. The whole dam would have completely flowed, and I think Holly may have really burst into tears. So it's pretty nice of you to end it on that note. But we do see a few people commenting, noticing that, hey, she almost teared up at the end, and she kind of did. I think the last question that she answered, she sort of had to swallow and kind of like gave a very short response because she was right there. She was about to tear up. So if you do get a chance, go on the YouTube channel, check it out. I think it's called something like Holly Holm talks about getting kicked by a fan and how good Ronda Rousey's boxing really is. So it's an interesting video, and Dennis, hats off to you, man. You did a great job.
Oh, thanks, man. I mean, anything else from the media there that stands out to you, Cass? I know you got the Polish connection with Joanna. What did you think about her? I mean, we've interviewed her before on the program. She was there in the open scrum. What did you think of the way she carried herself? The kicks, she had some nice kicks. What did you think of that whole thing?
I would say very contrasting to Ronda Rousey. And I'm not saying it in a bad way, but with Joanna, she's a bit more no-nonsense. Very, very nice. Very, very pleasant to be around. But whereas Ronda Rousey, she kind of entertains dumb questions and will give you a long answer and really give you sort of not to say what you want, but she'll give you, a big extended answer. Joanna's more sort of straight to the point. She'll say, yeah, look, like I said before about this and that. I think she says she enjoys media. I think she enjoys the aspect about it, but I think she gets sick of the dumb questions. So, but all in all, really, really, really nice.
Yeah, and for everybody out there who wonders, how can these guys get sick of these interviews? They literally get asked the same thing by the same person about 10 times in a row before you get to them. So it's always a challenge for me and Casper if we're not there first to have a good interview with them, but at the same time, get them out of that sort of, I suppose, downer of having to answer the same thing over and over, which is where the hair question with Lyoto Machida and things like that, and the kicks. We spoke to her about her kicks. She loves sneakers. Just try to find out about them as a person, get to a personal level, and then get back into the questions that you guys want to find out. So if you're ever wondering, why do these guys kick off the interview with this kind of funny stuff? Just got to get them to a level where they're happy and ready to go. Because sometimes you get these people rocking up and they just go straight for the hard question from the beginning. They just answered it and you just don't get very much out of them. So we like to give the guests, or we like to think that we give our guests or people that we interview a fun time. But I guess that was the media day, Cass. And I mean, from the weigh-in, I guess the thing that we should speak about is the Ronda Rousey, Holly Holm stare down. We were there, we were close, we were watching it. What were your thoughts when you first saw it? Because we were talking to Ariel about how it was an indication of how we thought that maybe Ronda wasn't as sure in what was going on, or also a way for her to sell more pay-per-views.
The first thing I noticed was that Ronda Rousey was very drawn in at the weigh-ins. I'd never seen her like that. She usually does look a little bit drawn in, but she still sort of looks healthy. This time around, a lot more drawn in. I thought, what happened with the weight cut? Because just the other day, one of the media members asked her about the weight cut, and she said, oh no, look, a lot of people get it wrong. I don't weight cut till right at the very end. I have very little weight to cut. And then here she was looking very drawn in. She was very confident about that aspect, that she's got the weight cut really nailed, and she works with Mike Dolce, all the meals are timed and this and that. So in theory, there's no reason for her to have any weight issues. So that's the first thing I noticed. As far as what happened between Holly and herself at the actual weigh-in, it seemed to me like Ronda was very nervous. It seemed like she wanted to walk up to Holly and intimidate her. Holly was very cool, calm, collected, and relaxed. She didn't flinch. She didn't react. And I think Ronda wanted a reaction. I think Ronda's not used to that. Usually she can see something in her opponent's eyes. And I think that there's something to be said about staying relaxed. Like you look at Betch Correia against Ronda Rousey in that stare down. And I think when you see Ronda being so cool, calm, and relaxed, it makes her look like she has the upper hand. And in this case, it was the opposite. Ronda Rousey looked very fired up. Holly Holm looked like she didn't really care, and I don't think that sat well with Ronda Rousey. And I don't know whether she sort of started realizing the threat that Holly actually was, but for whatever reason, she felt the need to say all those things that she did about Holly Holm being fake, and I was like, where did all this come from? She said she's tired of the sweetheart act, which to me was crazy because there was just nothing between them prior to that. We'd seen them do stare downs and face-offs 100 times before, maybe not 100, maybe like, I don't know, 5 or whatever, but they always seemed very courteous, very cordial. There was nothing there. People wanted to talk about the face-offs and read into them. And, oh, my God, Ronda blinked first. This means she's scared. Or Holly did this. And I don't know. Maybe that didn't sit well with Ronda. But for whatever reason, she felt the need to say all those things. And the other thing, and I don't know if it was captured in the video, but Holly Holm walked off pretty much straight away. As soon as Ronda started talking, Holly went backstage, went behind the curtains, and Ronda was still talking, which seemed to me like she was very intent on having the last word. And probably the biggest moment where I thought, wow, I think Ronda's nervous about this one. I wouldn't necessarily say scared, but definitely nervous. What was your take, Dennis?
Yeah, I agree with you, man. Perfectly put. And also, just what she said on the microphone, not that captivating, I guess. She was sort of stumbling over her words a little bit. And it was a bit weird. But yeah, excellently put together, Cass. I agree on that as well. On the day as well, you and me, we got a chance to speak to Dana White. Now, not many media people can speak to Dana White these days. He doesn't do as many interviews. We got an opportunity to speak with him. He's a very, very interesting guy. What people don't know is he is literally doing interview after interview after interview. He was literally on the phone right before he walked up and did the interview with us. What were your impressions on the man, the president of the UFC?
Look, it was all business. We didn't want to mess around, or we didn't want to chat too much about him, to him about other things. It was literally, he came in, we did the interview. I'll ask you, man, what were your impressions?
He really impresses me with the fact that he sort of, in his mind, has everything that he needs. When you ask him a question, he'll bring up some interesting facts. And we did ask him. Why did this thing with Ronda happen? Did it have anything to do with selling more pay-per-views? And he wasn't angry at us or anything, but he was very firm in the fact that the UFC would never tell anybody to sell a pay-per-view or say anything in order to sell a pay-per-view. So it was interesting to get that perspective on him. It was also interesting to get his thoughts on Miocic Tate. Earlier in the day, he did a Q&A with fans where someone asked him about Miocic Tate, and he said that if she's thinking about retiring, she should retire, something along those words. And then when we brought it up, we had this feeling that maybe it had been in the back of his mind. We didn't ask him about Miocic Tate specifically, but we asked him what it takes basically for someone to get that next title shot, because Juliana was there. There's a bunch of other girls wanting the next title shot, and he was actually the one who brought up Miocic Tate himself, talking about how if she thinks, if she mentions retirement, then maybe she should retire, and that kind of thing as well. So it was very interesting to sort of get a glimpse into the way his mind works and also spend a little bit of time with him.
Well, I think that was him trying to get a message out there, because he said that previously at the Q&A. Someone asked him about it, and he talked about Miocic Tate retiring. And then when we asked what does it take, he mentioned it as well. It wasn't, like you mentioned, it wasn't prompted. We didn't ask anything about Miocic Tate. So I think Dana White's smart in the sense that he knows this is going to get into the media, and he's trying to send a message to Miocic Tate, which is funny enough because she may not have to worry about that now that Ronda Rousey's not champion.
And for everybody who wasn't there, the UFC did a really good job. They set up this fan village, which is basically 2 seconds on it. They had a bunch of Q&As, a bunch of stands. It was almost like a little mini fan expo. Nothing along those sizes, but people got to do a bunch of Q&As, got to meet their fighters, and get a bunch of photos signed. So they did a really, really good job for what it was, and a lot of fans out there really enjoyed their time. Now,
before we move on, the other thing that I have to mention, you asked me what I think about Dana White. Here's the other crazy thing. During the Dana White Q&A, you can see that. It's on our channel, the full thing. I think it goes for half an hour or so. A lot of people ask Dana White questions about, fight things and things they were curious about. But I think every second question from a fan was a fan asking for something. People saying, I got shit tickets. Can you give me better tickets? One girl was like, she's like, I'm half Vietnamese. Ben Nguyen is fighting on the card. Can I be the ring girl? And Dana White's like, yeah, all right, fuck it. You can be the ring girl. We were like, holy shit. I got crappy tickets. Can you give me better tickets? All right, cool. I'm a big fan of Joanna, and she's crazy and this and that. Da, 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 da. She's terrifying. Can I meet Joanna after the event? Okay, sure, you can meet Joanna. Oh, I'm a big fan of Holly Holm. Can I meet Holly Holm? Yeah, okay, sure. Can we hang out backstage? You want to hang out? Yeah. What do you want to do? I don't know, just hang out with you, Dana. All right, cool, we'll organize. It was like, he literally didn't say no to anyone. I think there was one guy at the end who's like, can I get 2 VIP passes? And he's like, we don't even have a VIP pass. And he's like, oh, can I get this? The guy got too greedy, and I think finally Dana told him no. But everything else, one girl asked She's like, I'm a massive Ronda Rousey fan, and I want to. She always gets buffalo wings after her fights, and I want to serve it to her. And Dana White's like, we actually closed down a restaurant so that Ronda can have buffalo wings. And she's like, can I serve her the wings? Dana's like, okay, sure, you can serve her the wings. It was crazy to see how much fans got away with. I mean, you and me, we've been obviously MMA fans for a long time. We've been covering the sport as media for the last, I think almost 2 years. But before that, we never had any of these expos or anything like that. So we were sitting there going, dude, if we weren't media, if we were there as fans, we'd be taking the house. We'd be asking for anything and everything. So it's pretty awesome to see the UFC giving back to the fans like that. That's another thing that I was very impressed with. And, a lot of people talk about UFC this and negativity and whatever, and, a lot of times rightfully so. But this is one of those things where I was like, damn, very impressive, and it's a positive thing that has to be noted.
Possibly one of the biggest... one of the people that was most disappointed by the Ronda Rousey loss was the girl that was supposed to get her the buffalo wings.
Yeah.
And the shutdown place. I mean, didn't really pan out with her, but points for being creative. Let's jump over to the event, Cass. I mean, it was a Sunday morning here in Melbourne. Let's paint the picture for everybody. What did you think of the crowd? Was it weird seeing a crowd of that size rocking up to a fighting event that early in the morning on a Sunday?
Well, I got to say, the first thing that I noticed was the stadium on the inside looked really, really good. It was beautifully done. I looked down at the crowd. Honestly, a lot of people seemed disappointed. A lot of people were complaining about the view lines. A lot of people were complaining they couldn't see anything. A lot of people were talking about how they're still drunk from the night before. And we said it to Ariel the day before. There's going to be a lot of sleepy people there. And it's correct. I think a lot of people got shitty with us because they were like, oh, Australia, we're not all bogans. We're not all still drinking from the night before. Of course not everybody. I'm not saying 100% of the arena. But there were a lot of people there that were still drunk from the night before. Or, at the very least, went out the night before, slept a few hours, and came to the event on just a few hours sleep. So I think that was another reason why, you heard Joe Rogan saying how it's, Australians are so polite and they're so nice. Well, when the first fight kicks off at 10:15 a.m. in the morning and you've had a few hours sleep and the viewing lines aren't the greatest, and it's a massive, massive stadium. So, if you're starting shouts like Aussie, 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 oi, 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 down the other end of the stadium and it just doesn't catch on, that's a big part of that.
Yeah, it was interesting because obviously I knew that a lot of those fans are going to be casual fans that were just there to see Ronda Rousey, but you and me, Cass, we've been to a lot of fight nights, we've been to a lot of smaller events here in Australia. We were at UFC 110 that had a pretty good card as well, but we're sort of used to being around more hardcore fans that know more about everybody and sort of know about all the different fight styles. And you get some casual fans there, but a lot of those guys are big fight fans. And it was just really interesting to see some of the casual fans sort of sitting there trying to figure out what was going on. In particular, the Jarrett Rochold, Stefan Struve fight confused a lot of people. Had a lot of people going, what's going on? Why isn't anybody doing it? What's he doing over there? A lot of sort of generally disappointed people. A lot of casual fans. And also, like you mentioned, because of the size of the stadium, people couldn't get a chant going, which also killed some of the buzz. It was very, very quiet through a lot of the fights. And then there was a wave. A wave, we call it a Mexican wave here in Australia because it originated from Mexico, I believe.
I think everyone calls it a Mexican wave all over the world.
I think there was a big debate on the internet. People were like, why do they call it a Mexican wave? They're all anti-Mexicans. Look, we don't call it a Mexican wave because we have anything against Mexicans. We love Mexicans. It's known as a Mexican wave here, and it was happening all throughout the Joanna and Valerie fight. Basically, these guys, these legends, they began it, and the whole stadium got into it. It was an interesting sight. Cass, I think you even got a video on your phone. Maybe at some point, if the quality's decent enough, we'll get it out there just so people can check it out. It was a pretty crazy sight. Well, the thing that disappointed me was, why wasn't this happening during the Stefan Struve Rochold fight? Why is this happening during the Joanna Valerie fight? A fight that I thought was really, really good, and I thought it really delivered.
It was a good fight, but it was also a very technical fight. And like you mentioned, there was a lot of casual fans. A lot of people just weren't that interested. A lot of people were just getting restless. And obviously it was 5 rounds. So I think a lot of people were just getting sick of it, and they were wanting, Ronda Rousey to come out, and they were waiting for that moment. And I think the commentators, or I saw a lot of people tweeting confused about why the crowd was reacting the way it was, because to them, they don't see there's a Mexican wave going. They just hear the crowd going absolutely nuts for parts of the Joanna Valerie fight, which may not have been the most crazy. It's not like someone got dropped or anything like that. So for anyone wondering why was the crowd going nuts during that fight, that's why. There was a Mexican wave going on in the background.
The people entertained themselves. Let's jump over to the main event. Ronda Rousey walks out. Huge ovation. Holly Holm walks out. All business. You could see it in her eyes. The crowd was very excited for this fight. It was an absolutely crazy experience. You and me were obviously in the stadium for when the upset happened. Describe to people in words, if you can, Cass, what the crowd was like when Holly Holm beat Ronda Rousey.
I said it to Ariel in the post-show. It was like New Year's happened. Everyone just went crazy. People were hugging and kissing and jumping up and down. I think it was because people realized, we spoke about that commercial for UFC 193, the one with a young Holly and a young Ronda, and it was a really amazing commercial, but the end, that tagline, I think it said something like, every revolution starts with a fight. We were like, huh? Like, what the hell does that mean? We just thought, you got a great commercial and it just ends on that note. I don't think it really captivates anyone. And yet here we were watching literally a revolution happen. Holly Holm, she dethroned the queen, and of course, it started with a fight. So I think people just appreciated the fact that here they were witnessing history. I think a lot of people thought we're going to come in, we're going to see Ronda Rousey, she's going to beat somebody in 30 seconds, and we're all going to be like, hey, I was here the day that Ronda Rousey beat somebody who we may soon forget. But yeah, I got to see Ronda Rousey have one of her 30-second victories. Instead, they got to see something much better, which was Ronda Rousey dethroned. People will remember Ronda Rousey's victories, but I think more than anything, those victories will sort of start to mold together. They'll say, hey, she beat, 4 girls or 5 girls or 10 girls or whatever, and, all lasted 25 minutes, but everybody's going to remember the night that she got knocked out by a massive underdog in Holly Holm, and we saw, a revolution. We saw a change of ownership for the bantamweight belt. It was a crazy thing to experience.
It was like Saving Private Ryan, the beginning scene where they're getting onto the beach. People walking around with arms and legs, crying. People were yelling. People were excited.
Yeah.
A couple of people told us there were some crying people as well, really super down. It was an unbelievable scene to be a part of. If ever a stadium shakes, that's the closest it would get to shaking from crowd noise. It was just unbelievable. When it happened, the noise that emulated from that stadium was remarkable. And me and Casper spoke about this later on, but we were very lucky to be a part of such a huge moment in the stadium. Some people that were covering the event, for example, Ariel Helwani spoke about how he had to watch it from a monitor in the back. We got a chance to be in the crowd with the people for it. And I think, it's definitely one of the best sporting memories that I have so far in Australia, Cass. But let's talk about this whole situation quickly. Ronda Rousey has gotten a lot of criticism from fans since her loss. A lot of people sort of putting out not the nicest tweets, talking about all these issues with her. Because we haven't really had a chance to talk to the fans about this, give me your thoughts on her performance. Where did she go wrong, and where is she now?
Well, Ariel asked me this during the post-fight show about Ronda's game plan. I didn't want to say too much just because I watched it live and I hadn't had a chance to really have a look at the fight and analyze it. It looked to me like she didn't really go in there with much of a game plan, and whatever she was doing, once it didn't work, any thought of a game plan pretty much evaporated. By the end of the first round, she was literally running after Holly. She was chasing her. She was throwing her strikes weren't technical at all. It looked like a lot of her confidence had been shaken. Whatever we felt about her at the weigh-ins, where she looked a little bit nervous, it was amplified during the fight. I think once Holly landed, there was a big left that she landed right at the very start of the fight. And I think once that happened, Ronda Rousey realized, wow, I'm not going to be able to close the distance and eat a few punches and then eventually get Holly Holm down to the ground like she was with a lot of her other opponents. I have to say, though, a lot of people are criticizing Ronda Rousey's game plan. I don't think it was as much Ronda's game plan as it was Holly just being the better fighter. Ronda Rousey pretty much fought like she's always fought all her other past opponents. There was very little adjustments made to sort of cater specifically for Holly, and Holly took advantage of that. I know a lot of people are saying, Ronda chased Holly and she went right into her wheelhouse, and she did. But in saying that, I couldn't see Ronda Rousey staying on the outside and trying to pick Holly Holm apart and use strikes. I mean, we know Ronda doesn't kick, so what's she going to do? Get in there into kicking range or into punching range and have Holly kick her from afar? I don't think there was really that much that Ronda could have done better. I mean, other than improve her striking and improve her other abilities. I wasn't shocked that Holly Holm was able to outstrike Ronda Rousey. What I was shocked about was that once Ronda did get her where she wanted, the clinch, she wasn't able to take her down. And there's a video out there where Firas Zahabi of TriStar Gym breaks down the fight and shows how Holly defended the takedowns. It's definitely worth a watch. Holly Holm, she had a brilliant game plan. She went back up against the cage where Ronda Rousey wasn't able to take her down. But yeah, as far as Ronda Rousey's game plan, I don't think it was so much of a game plan error as it was just Ronda Rousey's skills are limited. We spoke about it even in the Betch Correia fight. And again, I still thought Ronda Rousey was going to win this fight, so I was completely wrong. But even in the Betch Correia fight, she left her chin open, she was off balance, she was leaning forward. So the fact that, Holly Holm capitalized on that, hindsight is always 20/20, right? So it's not really that surprising.
It's interesting because there's a lot of people out there who say, Ronda Rousey, she became a movie star and she started believing in her own hype, and when she went out there, blah, 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 blah. And I just don't agree with those statements whatsoever. I think she went out there, like you said, Cass, and she did what she does. And when that didn't work, she didn't have anything to go to. And she was still doing what she does to the best of her ability while she was getting smashed in the face, which impressed me in a lot of ways, because a lot of people, they get smashed in the face, they give up, but she was still in there and she was still trying to hit her. It wasn't technical. Obviously, if there was a game plan there, it was a bad game plan. If there was no game plan, what she was doing wasn't going to work. But she went in there like a kamikaze pilot, and she went in there, and if she was going to get knocked out, she's going to get knocked out, but she was going to do her best doing it. And I think there's a lot of respect to be had for what she did in the octagon in that regard. But I agree with you, Cass. I think that she versed these girls who were very, very good athletes, but they just weren't at the top of the game like Holly Holm is. Miocic Tate made a lot of mistakes in a fight with Ronda Rousey, took the fight to places where it shouldn't have been, didn't make any sense. Betch, obviously not on the level of Holly Holm. Sarah McMahon has proven that she's not on the level of Holly Holm and a lot of the other competitors. And Kat Zingano just jumped in there and got caught in an armbar. So she was used to going in there and dominating these girls, closing the distance and beating them up. And it didn't happen, like you mentioned. There were just some gaps in her skills. I mean, the fact that she never kicks, that's something that she couldn't do. With her takedowns as well, she's a very good judo takedown artist. But how much has she focused on wrestling? As in shooting in, taking a leg, doing a double leg, all these kinds of things that you need in your tool belt if your clinch takedowns don't work. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what happens in her training, but what it seems like to me was going on was she focused on her judo, she works with the Gracies on her ground stuff, and she works with Edmund on her striking, and they missed out on the gaps in her skill set that she may need if a situation like this arises. And I think Greg Jackson put it to us best, Cass, when we interviewed them after the whole event, where he said that she does the same thing in every fight. And when someone does the same thing in every fight, it's very easy to game plan and prepare for them. I mean, there's been some really good examples of fighters like Fabricio Werdum, where every fight they get better and better and you don't know what to expect. With Ronda Rousey, you knew what to expect, and the Jackson Winklejohn camp prepared for them, and that's the result. That's what happened. Now, I have to ask you, Cass, a lot of criticism going at Edmund about the coaching, whether or not she needs to go to a different camp. What's your whole thought on this whole thing?
I'm not necessarily going to sit here and say that she needs to go to another camp, but the issues, I know a lot of people, in between rounds, Edmund said to her she's doing a beautiful job and she's doing fantastic and great and we've got her right where we want her. I know a lot of people take issue with that. I don't take issue with that so much as his actual technical advice, because look, as a fighter, you may, as a coach, you know your fighter better than most people, right? So like you've always said, you don't like the Henry Hooft approach. You don't like if someone's yelling to you. And obviously Greg Jackson's got a completely different way. I've never seen actually, I think you might do with some fighters, but you generally don't see Greg Jackson yelling at a fighter saying you're in trouble, you've done this wrong or anything like that. So the fact that Edmund's saying to Ronda, look beautiful, you did a great job, I can forgive that, and it may actually be a good thing just to restore Ronda's confidence, just because I think she was very much shook after that first round. The problem is that he said that Holly Holm was only going after that left punch. That's all she's got, which is actually inaccurate, because Holly Holm was catching Ronda with a right counter, I believe it was a right hook, for majority of that first round. So the fact that he didn't tell Ronda about that at all, I think that's the biggest sort of downfall of the coaching for that fight. As far as moving to another camp, I definitely don't expect that to happen. The way you saw Edmund sort of getting emotional and kind of tearing up when we asked about the relationship between him and Ronda, I don't think she's going to leave that camp. Travis Brown trains there. That's her, she's in a relationship with him. She's known Edmund for years and years and years. it's one of those when hell freezes over, and I'm not trying to be negative. I'm not saying that she should leave. I just definitely don't see her leaving Glendale Fight Club. It's what she's comfortable with, and we know that Edmund's got this whole thing about bankruptcy or something. I have a feeling it's all going to blow over. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people think, but unless Glendale Fight Club stops existing, which I don't think that's going to happen, I think she's there for the long run. What do you think?
It's interesting because it's one of those situations where Edmund and the team has to sit down all together, in my opinion, and admit, look, what we did in this fight didn't work, and people made mistakes in this camp leading into this fight and preparing for this fight. And as long as people can acknowledge the fact that mistakes were made, things weren't taken into account, the advice, like you mentioned, Casper, wasn't the best that he gave to her, I think they can move on. But if they go back and they have a meeting and Edmund said, look, you could beat this girl 9 times out of 10 doing what you're doing, and we're going to keep doing what we're doing for the rematch, then I think that's when some real problems are going to arise. So what Ronda, in my opinion, needs to do is, obviously her and Edmund have a very special relationship, so they should stay together, but they really need to bring in some key people into that team, or work with the people in the team like the Gracies. I think she's got a very good wrestling coach there as well, to figure out how she can advance her game plan and what she can do. Like in the fight, for example, Holly Holm wasn't going to probably take her down. So adding some kind of kicking game to Ronda Rousey's game would have possibly been something that she wasn't going to expect. That obviously Holly Holm is a kickboxing world champion, so you're not going to kick with a kickboxing world champion, but maybe there was 1 or 2 types of kicks that you could have put in there that would have at least knocked her off, expecting Ronda to do what she did. So I'm very interested to see what happens, but the key is, will they look at what happened, and will they acknowledge the fact that there are some gaps that need to be filled? Will Ronda start working on some of these gaps? And what will she do in the next training camp leading into this rematch? Because if none of this gets acknowledged and we see the same Ronda Rousey game plan and the same Ronda Rousey style against Holly Holm, I find it very difficult to see how she's going to beat Holly Holm. But let me ask you this, Cass, because a lot of people are wondering if this rematch makes sense. I mean, looking at it, it does make sense from the standpoint of business. It's something that makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of from the standpoint of UFC making a lot of money. But what do you think? Does it make sense for Ronda Rousey to get this rematch with Holly Holm after the way she lost to her, with such a dominant performance from Holly Holm?
Well, it's like I said to Errol, it wasn't really close. I think Ronda landed maybe 1 or 2 decent shots. I think there was 1 shot that might have hurt Holly, maybe 2. But other than that, the fight wasn't close. So does it make sense for Ronda? No. It makes sense for the UFC because obviously a lot of casual fans, I think, are still in disbelief and think that it was a fluke. And I see a lot of people, a lot of our mates, a lot of people that don't really follow MMA but tune into the Ronda Rousey fight. They're saying, "Oh, Ronda looked off. She didn't look in shape," or something like that. I disagree. I think that's a lot of casual fans making excuses and sort of still in disbelief. I think if the rematch happened within a few months, whether it was the start of the year or the mid-year or UFC 200, it would probably go exactly the same, unless Ronda Rousey made massive, massive changes. And even then, I mean, 6 months from now, I think Daniel Cormier said she probably needs about a year to work in the gym and really improve her skills. So for Ronda Rousey, I don't think the rematch makes sense, because if she goes in and she loses to Holly Holm again, or Holly Holmes, as a lot of people say these days, she's not some Mexican gangbanger. Her name's Holly Holm, not Holly Holmes. But if Ronda Rousey goes in again and loses twice now, what excuses are you going to have? The casual fans will realize, oh, wow, okay, she lost fair and square. The hardcore MMA fans will pretty much expect the same result anyway. So I think it's going to damage Ronda Rousey's marketability. I think you probably got to give Miocic Tate a shot. Maybe let Holly Holm build up her resume a little bit more, and then sort of tease into the rematch. But yeah, no, look, the rematch is going to do massive business for the UFC, and I think that's probably what they're going to do. You do UFC 200, Ronda Rousey versus Holly Holm. I mean, as far as stacked cards go, you do that. Maybe DC and John Jones, and I don't know, maybe I don't know who else you can put on there, but yeah, it's going to do great business. But for Ronda Rousey, I don't think it makes sense. She needs to work on those mistakes, and it's going to take a lot longer than just 6 months.
And there's a comeback story to be had here if Ronda Rousey did go out there and have to possibly even fight someone else before she fought Holly Holm, like a Juliana Pena or something like that, and build her way back up to the title. But obviously, like you mentioned, it does look like the UFC are going to go for the rematch. I have to say, though, very excited for the women's bantamweight division, because Holly Holm being champion, and of course she will probably have to have this rematch with Ronda Rousey. And by the way, Ronda Rousey is the favorite early on in the betting books over there in Vegas, but that's neither here or there. If Holly Holm does beat her, which I think is a good chance depending on what happens with Ronda's camp and all that, I'm very interested to see what happens with the division because it opens things up a little bit. I love seeing Ronda Rousey as champion, but I really want to see Holly Holm have some of these fresh matchups in the division. I really think it's going to get things excited. Do you think this is sort of a win-win situation, Cass? Ronda Rousey loses again. I mean, she's out of the UFC. She's huge business for the company. But then out of the dust comes a phoenix and Holly Holm, and there's a lot of fun new matchups for the division.
I think it's a win for hardcore MMA fans. I don't think it's a win for business overall. And that's not a shot on Holly Holm. She's an absolute sweetheart and a lovely person and obviously an exciting fighter. I mean, she just got the KO of possibly the KO of the year in a huge win. I just don't think she's going to resonate with casual fans as much as Ronda Rousey, which is interesting because she's sort of like a blue-collar, hard-working girl, and I think a lot of people will relate to that. I just don't think the media will be clamoring for her like they did with Ronda Rousey, because with Ronda Rousey, you get someone with a lot of attitude, a lot of sass, and that's what the media love about it. So because of that, obviously the UFC got a lot of exposure. You get Ronda Rousey on Jimmy Kimmel or Conan O'Brien, you get her on the Today Show. I know Holly Holm has been making the rounds. I think a lot of that is sort of going off Ronda Rousey's momentum. It's almost like Ronda Rousey made her famous, you know, and I hate to say that because Holly Holm was a very accomplished fighter before this fight. But just because you're a good fighter doesn't mean you're famous. So Holly Holm is now kind of looked at as the woman who beat Ronda Rousey. And I don't know how much longer that's going to last. So for business overall, I don't think it's a great thing that Ronda Rousey lost. Actually, in the short term, it is good because the rematch is going to be massive. Everyone's going to tune in. I think this fight, in a lot of ways, was kind of flying under the radar. People were like, oh, yeah, Ronda Rousey will kind of probably win. I don't know, maybe I'll watch it, maybe I won't, whatever. Now, everyone's awake. People are like, my God, I have to watch the rematch, and I'm going to be sitting on the edge of my seat. I have to watch Ronda Rousey hopefully win back her title. That's what a lot of people are going to be thinking. So, in the immediate future, it's good for business, but if Ronda Rousey loses again, which there's a very good chance she will, probably not that great for business because the hardcore fans will be like, great, here's an exciting champion. The casual fans will be like, well, Ronda's gone, I don't care anymore.
There you go, guys. So it was a crazy experience. We enjoyed it. And just before we go, Cass, because we are sort of running out of time, just want to say thank you to all the people that supported us. For people that don't know, we did a pre-show and a post-show with Ariel Helwani, and we took a gander at the comments, and a lot of real positive comments from our listeners. Some hardcore Submission Radio fans popping on there and letting Ariel know who Submission Radio is and why they belong in the pre-show and the post-show with them. So to those guys out there who are listening right now, we thank you very much. We read through your comments and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, like Dennis said, pretty much those sentiments exactly. We really, really do appreciate it because obviously that's, you know, MMA Fighting's channel and you guys are sort of coming over, invading, trying to take over and giving us a lot of support. It's not something that you had to do, but the fact that you guys went out and did it, we just can't say how much we appreciate it. And obviously a massive thank you to Ariel Helwani because it was a great bit of exposure for us and, you know, it just so happened we were the only other SB Nation guys there, so I think it worked out mutually. But yeah, obviously he could have said, you know, hit the road. He approached us about doing it, and of course we were more than happy to do it, but it was kind of like a match made in heaven. We really appreciate that, you know, he wanted to do it with us, and I think it worked out well, and thank you so much to you guys. Now, before we wrap up, because this has been a super long episode, we're about to stop talking. We promise we'll let you get on with whatever you're doing in your day. As is customary, Dennis, before we let the fans go, any last words for the fans? I know you saw a movie the other day, so I think there's a Dennis review in store.
Well, yeah, just real quick, I saw 007 Spectre. I haven't seen a movie come out where you get one review that says it's the best of all time and another review that says it's the worst of all time. And it pains me to say, but I think it is one of the worst 007 movies that I've seen of all time.
Wow.
I don't want to spoil it for anybody. Make sure you go check it out because they spent over $200 million making it. There's some beautiful action scenes, but the story didn't really make too much sense. It went too long. And by the end, you just left scratching your head, wondering why this happened. For people that don't really watch 007, there was the typical 007, like a Pierce Brosnan type guy who's very sort of typical. He'd walk out there with his martini and he'd make love to women, and it would all be sort of like a secret spy type thing. And then Daniel Craig came along and they threw that out the window. He was more real. You had realer fight scenes. They threw out some of that mumbo jumbo that was lame, and that was really, really cool. Unfortunately, with this movie, they're neither here or there. There's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, and unfortunately, they lost their way cast. It's 2 Timothy Johnson mustaches out of 3, and that's just because the 007 name is attached to the movie.
Let me ask you this, because the last one I didn't enjoy. Was it better or worse than the last one? The one where they were like in Scotland, they went off into a forest or something, and it wasn't very James Bondy. Was it better or worse?
Yeah, so this one makes that one look like the best 007 movie of all time.
Oh, wow.
Made me miss it. Made me want to watch it again. So I have to say, it was an incredible cast, but they just completely missed the boat with this one. And I'm not surprised why Daniel Craig doesn't want to do any more 007 movies. I think he's a talented actor, and even though he's a fantastic 007, I think he misses doing other movies and playing other characters. And while I miss him as 007, I look forward to seeing him play those other roles.
Yeah, I think I'll just stick with Mission Impossible because that franchise is still well on track. Anyway, that's enough from us, guys. As always, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at SubmissionAUS. What's our Facebook, Dennis?
Facebook is facebook.com/Submission Radio AUS.
And don't forget to subscribe. Yeah, that's the one. Sure. Just Google it. Just go to submissionradio.com and we have all the links there. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up on the video, especially if you're watching on YouTube. Again, we appreciate you listening, and we'll catch you guys next week.